Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker. You want a darker version? Step into an age of plagues, punishments, and pottage, where medieval life is raw and unvarnished, stripped of the gleaming castles and knightly chivalry Hollywood sold you. The harsh truth: you probably wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to claws you cannot see, little, insistent, hungry, and to a blanket that weighs like a promise you never made. The wool is thick with last year's smoke and this year's grease. It smells faintly of turnip, sweat, and the goat who slept beside it last week when the frost came early. Your bed isn't a bed, not in the way you'd like to remember the word. It's a straw mattress palliasse, if you want the fancy stuff months ago and alive now with what it collected. Fleas, lice, the occasional beetle with a pilgrim's determination. Every shift you make squeezes a new wheeze of dust and life into the air. Above you, the thatch weeps. Not a storm, just ordinary winter air working on ordinary reeds, drip by patient drip. The roof's belly has been smoked black over years. Some say the smoke keeps the pests away. It doesn't. It only gives them somewhere dramatic to appear from. The timber rafters creak as though remembering better forests. Somewhere in the dark corner, a hen makes a soft, reproachful commentary on the state of mourning, and the small piglet promised to be bacon and so spared nothing snuffles in its pen, which is also your house. Then the bell. Not a chime, not a gentle anything. An iron tongue hitting iron ribs until the noise is a shape you can swallow, prime or near enough. You don't own a clock, the parish does. Time here is rented in portions, from the priest, from the Lord, from the seasons. The bell tells you the first rule of the day before you've even opened your eyes. Move when you're told. You share the bed, of course. Privacy is a word for a law book, not a hut. Your wife is a warmth along your back. A child is a hot, damp weight across your calves. Somewhere under the blanket concerto is a cousin who came just for the week in Michaelmas and never left. Feet are arranged in a polite war. Heel against ankle, a ring of defences against the cold that marches in through every gap in the wattle and daub walls. You breathe, and your breath shows you itself, a brief ghost in the room's thin light. You sit up, and the cold takes your lungs as though it was waiting. The air is the sort that bites first and apologizes later. Your spine complains 22 years old, and you creak like an old gate. The palliasse surrenders you reluctantly. The fleas don't. Bare feet meet a floor that is either wet, a leak you couldn't fix yesterday, or crusted, something the chicken did while dreaming of corn. Either way, you're part of it now. The rushes scattered to freshen. The place are last month's and have done their duty. What's clean is what's frozen, and there isn't much of either. The room is one room. It is bedroom, kitchen, pantry, nursery, stable, chapel, and sick ward by turns. Smoke from last night's fire still hangs under the rafters in a low, argumentative layer. The hearth itself is a sulk of embers, a few hopeful coals under ash that pretends to be snow. On a shelf, a single bowl, a wooden spoon, a knife that has seen too much bone and not enough whetstone. On a peg, your one tunic, which you hung by the hearth in optimism, and which has dried into a shape that will begrudge your shape all day. The smell has its own litany. Stale ale, the sweetish top note of old milk, the animal musk that clings to wood like confession, damp wool, cold ash, damp earth, damp everything. Once in a while, someone brings a posy bay or lavender if they can flatter a hedge into sharing, but Winter is honest about itself, and the hut is honest with you. This is a house of thresholds between warm and cold, clean and dirty, ours and the Lord's, and you live forever with your toes on the line. You cough because everyone coughs. The air in here is seasoned with 100 fires and 100,000 words no one remembers saying. It is thicker near the rafters, a soup of years. Children cough, because that's what children are taught by adults who cough. Somewhere you have heard there are places with windows glazed in glass. They keep the wind and let in the light. You try to imagine such a luxury and can't. The imagining catches on the fact that your window is a cloth stretched on a frame, stiff with frost and faith. It bows in the breeze like a sail on a ship going nowhere. You dress with the unwillingness of a scab being picked. Linen next to skin if you've earned it, wool if you haven't, nothing at all if the year has been poor. Your tunic is the right colour for a field, because it is made of the field spun from it, stained by it, returned to it by degrees each day. The belt has a buckle that came from a market 3 villages away and feels like jewellery. You tug your cap on and feel the clean line where lice have made their own path across your scalp. Your shoes, if today is a shoes day, are leather with the idea of soles. More often, your feet are themselves. You are hungry, and not in the modern, interesting way. You are the sort of hungry that comes with arithmetic. How many oats are left? How much rye in the bin? What favour you owe the neighbour with a cow? Breakfast exists, but only so the day can. There will be pottage, if there was yesterday. A thickening story in a pot that never empties and never quite tastes of anything new. If there isn't, there will be ale-thin, weak, safe, and the knowledge that your hands will be heavier by noon. The bell finishes telling you what you already knew, and then begins to gossip it to the next hamlet along. You reckon by sound and walk by duty. First the animals, because their hunger is simpler than yours and demands less conversation. The piglet will squeal like a doctrine is being violated. The hens will step daintily over the dirt as though they were ambassadors from a cleaner world. You'll scrape the ash, lay kindling, nurse the ember into a flame that has to be small enough to spare the wood you don't have and big enough to boil the water you hope won't make anyone sick. There is a logic to the day that feels like hunger's older brother. You don't so much choose as remember. Fetch water before the path is churned to ruts. Check the roofline. Tap the thatch with a pole and watch yesterday's frost skitter down like spilled salt. If a tile on the manor's bake oven has cracked again, there will be a queue later and a supervisor with a chalk who makes notes on people as if they were loaves. If the reeve comes by, you say yes before he asks, because saying no means the same thing you meant and costs more than you've got. You were born here and will likely die here, inside a circle so tight you could measure it with your stride. But that doesn't make the world small. It just means the world is heavy, and you carry your share of it on your back. The rules are not written anywhere you can touch, but they are no less legible. Don't take wood from the wrong wood. Don't draw water from the wrong water. Bow when the horse passes, because the man on it knows your name as a number. Pay God in the coin of attention. Pay the Lord in labour. Pay winter in fingers, if necessary. And yet, it isn't all punishment. Even now, with the cold licking your ankles and the piglet preparing a legal case, there's the shared breath under the blanket, the warm patch where the child slept, the way the smoke makes the first light from the door seem solid enough to lean on. Someone will tell a joke later that only works if you've wrestled a broom with a thatch. Someone will sing while turning the handle of the quern, and the sound will make the flower seem like a victory. In the corner, near the peg with your tunic, a sprig of last summer's rosemary is drying to a crisp and lending its ghost to the air. Luxury, if you squint. The bell gives up. The silence that follows is an order you can finally keep. You set your hand to the latch, a simple loop of iron polished by every morning of your life. Outside, the lane is a memory of cartwheels and boots, frozen just enough to catch you if you're not careful. The hut breathes behind you. The sky is the colour of pewter and sermons. You step out because it is what there is to do. You step out because the day only starts when you consent to it. And consent here is not a decision, it's a reflex. No romance, only survival. Yes, but survival is an art, and you've been apprenticed since birth. The rules come first, before comfort, before privacy, before choice. But somewhere between the bell and the broom, between the smoke and the thin light, between the itch and the ache, you remember that you are not alone in any of it. The house is a house of smells, yes, but also a house of souls, and those count even when the counting is hard. You pull the door to, feel the latch bite, and go to meet the bell's instructions with the only capital you own, your body and your day. You shuffle to the bucket with the dignity of a condemned man and the balance of a sailor in a squall. This is the family closet wood, hoop, handle, and hope kept behind a hanging cloth that is not so much a screen as a suggestion. It's heavy already because Uncle Wolfstan had opinions about last night's turnips, and the air above it could stun a mule. There's no seat. You hover, negotiate, and remember too late that winter wood is cold as law. You do what humans have always done and will always do. And here the second rule of the day clears its throat. Nature calls, society shrugs. The routine is choreography, and everyone knows the steps. The smaller ones are sent out with a little pot to the ash heap practice runs for a lifetime of errands. The bigger pot gets the dawn parade. Someone grips the handle, someone else opens the door, and out you go, sloshing carefully, because the lane is rutted, the frost is sly, and the consequences of a slip are not philosophical. Tradition recommends you announce yourself. Mind the water, hold your breath, God save your shoes. The cry shifts with parish and century, sometimes French on the tongue, sometimes not, but the meaning is simple. I'm about to turn gravity into a public utility. The street is the sewer, not figuratively. There's a central gutter kennel running like a raw seam down the lane, collecting what the day makes of itself. Household slops, chamber pots, brew waste, the runoff from a butcher's morning, peelings, feathers, and a surprising number of things that once claimed to be alive. On a wet day, the city does your flushing for you. On a dry one, the smell lingers like a sermon no one asked for. You tip the bucket toward the gutter and watch the contents take their place among their cousins and competitors, headed for the stream that will be called wicked by noon and necessary again by dusk. There are rules on parchment and shouted, don't throw from an upper window without a warning, don't tip where people must stand, don't foul the church path, don't let your midden wall collapse into the neighbour's pig pen. There are officers for it too, rakers, beadles, men with poles and carts, and a professional tolerance for the unspeakable. They scrape the kennel into heaps, the heaps into carts, the carts into somewhere else. Somewhere else is a field beyond the walls, or a pit with ideas above its station. The euphemism is night soil. The pay is better than a lot of honest work. The smell moves house with you and never leaves. If you are lucky enough to live where pits are dug a privy midden in the yard, you learn their arithmetic as children learn psalms. The liquid finds the soil, the solids don't. Over time, the pit becomes a slow-breathing thing that eats quietly until it doesn't. When it fills, someone must climb in lantern on a hook, rope around the chest and shovel for a wage that can buy a second set of clothes you will never wear indoors. These men are the gong farmers, kings of the invisible economy. They work at night because the day would rather pretend. They know the city's bowels better than any lord knows his lineage and, like bowels, complain only when ignored. Every so often a pit collapses into a cellar and a family wakes in a miracle they didn't pray for. Afterwards there are laws. Afterwards there are always laws. Public latrines exist, and they are exactly as public as the name suggests. A bench, a row of holes, a trickle, if the town is rich, a channel, to carry away what needs carrying. You sit shoulder to shoulder with neighbours and strangers and consider the social invention known as small talk. No partitions, no privacy. only the conversational agility to pretend. The smell is democratic. The view is unfortunate. The acoustics are memorable. Somewhere, a clerk has written a regulation that says, "Who keeps it clean?" Somewhere, a clerk's cousin ignores it. If you've coin, you bring a plug of wool for wiping. If you've favour, you have straw. If you've neither, you have your imagination and a manageable despair. Castles are fancier, yes, but they are not better. A garderobe sounds grand until you meet it. A shaft through the wall, a stone seat, a view, if you stand, of the outer world where the wind can argue with your business. The drop ends in a pit or a fosse, or, with architectural optimism, the moat. When the Lord boasts his walls are unscalable, a practical man looks for the privy chute. Attackers have been known to come in by the unsentimental route. In winter, the seat bites. In summer, the flies arrive like envoys. The servants sprinkle straw and herbs and call it victory. The steward says, "Conserve water," and means, "Don't foul the well I drink from." There is a monastery in the mind that does this well. Stone reredaughters are lined over running water, latrine drains singing beneath cloisters, discipline making cleanliness, almost a theology. But for every Cistercian achievement, there are 10 parishes where the jakes is a lean-to and the pit a suggestion. City charters forbid tanners and dyers from dumping their filth where people live. The tanners and dyers listen politely and then conduct their trade in the river that flows through everyone's mouth eventually. Upstream and downstream are words with teeth. Now and then, a council orders a cleaning day. Doors open, middens heaved, gutters scraped, pigs hired by default to nose through what no one else will touch. The pig is the last honest street cleaner, paid in kind and prosecuted when he gets too enthusiastic about a baby's stray crust. Children learn to leap the kennel at 2. The elderly interpret the leap as prayer. Shoes leave a message on floors. Floors send it back up into soup. Soup sends it through the house. That's not poetry. That's the disease math. You cannot see a bacillus. You can, however, count the funerals after a warm week and a slow river. People swear by ash. A handful thrown in the bucket blunts the nose, thickens the story, persuades fly and worm they are not invited. Lime, if you can beg it from the mason, is better. Herbs are a kindness to the living. Bay, rosemary, tansy, household saints of small mercies. The church says filth offends God. The steward says filth offends rents. The midwife says filth kills babies. All three are right, and none of them are in charge of the weather, which decides whether the kennel moves and whether the well down the lane is a blessing or a lawsuit. And still humour makes its own ladder. You learn to call the bucket by pet names, because dignity is a tool, not a luxury. You compare latrines like men compare horses. You master the sidestep past the butcher's door at noon because you'd prefer to keep the soles of your shoes and the contents of your stomach separate. You find the one alley that always runs clean because some blessed unknown neighbour has the habit of throwing a pail at dawn and another at dusk. You teach your children to shout a warning with gusto and to stand windward when they can. You become a connoisseur of rain. Sieges take all this and make it worse. Lock a town behind its gates and let the buckets fill, and you will learn that dysentery, the flux, in a voice that knows what it's talking about, kills more efficiently than iron. The moat, once a wall of water, becomes a basin of accusation. In the castle, the steward orders the garderobes scraped and the pits limed, and discovers that men who didn't mind dying on a wall dislike drowning in other men's decisions. Attackers build trebuchets. Defenders build rules about where to put what. On the day the wall is breached, everyone discovers that the worst smells were only ever the preface to the new ones. Is it funny? It has to be. You can't get through a winter without laughing at least once while holding your breath. There is a daft grace to it all, a civic ballet in clogs. Doors open, warnings fly, water falls, gutters run, rakers rake, carts creak, pigs snuffle, bells ring. and somewhere a clerk adds a fine to a list he cannot enforce. Nothing here is private. Not your prayers, not your habits, not your bucket. You live close, and closeness is both danger and defense. Your neighbor's shame today might spare your child tomorrow when the raker happens to pass at the right moment. You go back inside lighter and older. You set the bucket down with a thud that every house knows in its bones. The cloth swings back into place, a curtain on a play that will be performed again before noon. You wash your hands if water allows, rub them with ash if not, wipe them on wool if honesty insists. The hearth coughs a little flame, the room accepts you again. Nature called. Society shrugged. You dance the steps without missing a beat. On to breakfast. Then to the pottage that has known every story you've told above it, and to the day that will add a few more. You break your nights fast with what the fire can be bothered to remember. The pot has been hanging there since anyone can recall, dark with age, sour with yesterday, full of a broth that is not a recipe so much as a biography. Pottage, a little barley from last year's bin, a handful of dried peas that rattle like bones in a drum, onion ends, a turnip that tried to look brave, a bruised leek if the garden kept its promise. You stir with the same stick you use to poke the embers, and the smell is smoke first, then earth, then the faint honesty of something green that somehow outlived the frost. Bowls are wood, spoons too, if you've not pawned them. You do not ladle portions. You take your turn. The little ones get more liquid because liquid tricks a stomach. The old get more solids because the old are owed. You blow and sip and try not to think about the taste beyond the fact that it is warm and it is there. The fire nips your cheeks. The door leaks a draft down your neck. Your fingers learn again the old lesson that heat beats hunger, if only for an hour. Bread comes next, and bread in these parts is argument shaped into a loaf. Wheat is for people with coins and cousins at court. You live on rye, barley, or oats, whatever the last harvest spared, and the miller didn't keep as his fee. The loaf is dense and honest, the colour of mud in good boots. You don't slice it, you negotiate it. A knife in one hand, resolve in the other. You worry a piece away and set your jaw. Grit sings quietly on your teeth-quern stone dust, ground in with the meal and anthem for the day when your molars finally raise the white flag. On feast days in richer houses, stale bread is cut into trenchers to be plates. In yours, the bread is the meal, and the plate is the hand that holds it. You wash the mouthful down with ale that knows its place. Small beer, brewed weak on purpose, cloudy and kind. It is breakfast because the well is treacherous, the stream is a rumour, and boiling is dear in wood and time. Children drink it, so do the pious. So does the midwife who has been awake since Compline. It doesn't make you merry, it makes you safe. Someone in the house, often her who knows the yeast by its temper and not its name, keeps the mash moving through the seasons. A gallon to start the day, a few more for the men when the fields begin to steam. The wort smells sweet, the spent grain fattens the pig, and the bucket under the spigot is a small promise that dinner won't be a dry story either. There are rules beneath the hunger. The assize of bread and ale hangs like weather over towns with a conscience. How big a farthing loaf must be when grain is dear, what measure a penny buys when the harvest smiles, what fines the alewife pays if her brew walks too straight or too crooked. The Lord's mill takes its share because turning water into wages is a feudal miracle. The Lord's oven takes its coin because fire is a right like pasture and prayer. You can bake on your own hearth if you fancy a fine or a neighbour's complaint. Most don't. Instead, there's a bake day, dough tucked under shawls to rise on chests, loaves marched to the communal oven in baskets, each cut with a mark that says, "Mine," in a script older than ink. The oven coughs back heat like a dragon with manners. The door opens and closes with the seriousness of a rite. Someone always burns a loaf, someone always swears, someone always laughs anyway. You measure the year in grain as much as in saints. Seeds go in when the ground will take a thumb, barley and oats first because they forgive more. Rye because it endures where wheat despairs. Wheat itself. If God is in a tender mood, and your Lord hasn't promised the best field to his cousin's wedding, then you wait. There is a hungry gap in spring when the bins echo and the garden lies promising and green but not ready. That is when the pot learns what a leaf can do, and the bread learns humility, bulked with beans, peas, or anything that will grind without arguing too much. Harvest is a festival in a language that doesn't need words. Sheaves stack like soldiers. Gleaners follow with baskets and hope. The mill wheel turns like a prayer answered. Then the storing sacks tied and hung, bins tight as secrets, cats encouraged, traps baited, oaths sworn against rats who neither read nor care. Saints' days are the calendar's footnotes and its spine. They tell you when you may eat meat and when you must pretend you don't want it. Fridays are fish, vigils are fish, Lent is fish, and no dairy if the priest has his way and the bishop is paying attention. Here fish means herring salted until it remembers the sea with a flinch, or stockfish beaten with a mallet until it agrees to be food, or eels if you live near patience and water. Fast doesn't always mean less. It means different, which is a useful lie you tell your body so your soul can stand straighter. On true feast days, a patron saint, a marriage, a christening, someone brings out a joint that once had opinions, and the pot remembers marrow. For an hour, the hut is cathedral. Those who can, sweeten. Those who cannot, pretend. Honey is for the lucky and the brave. Sugar is for the rich and their dentists yet unborn. As for spices, they are words whispered through a locked door. Pepper travelled by ship, and camel and ledger, to sit in a lord's cupboard, behind a key that lives around a steward's neck. A pinch of it could cost a labourer days of wages, and it is counted like sin. Pepper on your lips tells the room that your purse is loud. Cinnamon, ginger, saffron, they exist the way constellations do, real and far. They make appearances in pies you will never see, in kitchens with more cooks than your parish has pigs. You learn instead to love leeks and mustard, and the bite of raw onion when the day asks for a promise it can taste. Dairy is a wager. Milk goes cruel in a morning. Butter and cheese are what you make when you can't afford to lose. In spring, the house smells like hope and curds. In winter, the crock is a memory you scrape. Eggs are a kindness hens give when the fox is distracted. You eat them soft on Sundays if father says the word and the season agrees. In Lent, some priests frown at eggs as white meat and frown harder at butter, so you spread your bread with pottage and call it devotion. The cow breathes steam in the byre and chews with the slow theological patience of a creature that knows tomorrow will look like today and finds no offence in that. There is danger even in the simple. Rye is generous, but sometimes haunted ergot lives in its shadow, a fungus that turns bread into sermons of fire and visions. A winter of damp and a summer of bad luck, and a village shakes, convulses, dreams, snakes, and blames saints or witches or themselves. You learn to winnow with suspicion, and to bless the miller when he frowns and says, "Not this bin, not this year." You pay him in flour and gratitude, and forget, for an afternoon, that he is a necessary thief. Mornings are not meals so much as maintenance. You eat to keep the field from winning, to give your hands a reason to close, to tell your knees they are not alone. No coffee, no fragrant promise in a cup, no bright engine in the blood, no fruit bowl apples or autumn, pears too, to be sliced thin and hidden in pies if you've a patron, otherwise eaten standing, fast, before they go to cider or to rot. You drink the small ale and feel it sit like a calm dog at your ribs. The pottage warms your fingers through the bowl, then your throat, then your chest. The bread reminds you that flour is a covenant between a field and your teeth, and that both must be kept. Now and then, when someone is ill or lucky, there is a posset hot ale frothed with a little milk and a little egg, and a lot of belief sipped from the good cup. because the good cup makes medicine more honest. Now and then, a neighbor brings a heel of white bread from his master's table, and you taste soft and sigh without meaning to. Now and then, a peddler passes, muttering pepper, the way a priest says mercy, and the house goes quiet while you imagine the hot spark on your tongue and remember the price and let the dream pass. The morning ends the way it began, with smoke in your hair and a tally in your head. Bowls wiped with a crust, crusts saved for sops. Pot slid back to the fire's edge to go on thinking. You tie up the bread in cloth because mice are theologians of opportunity. You rinse the beakers with a splash because you will use them again at noon and again at dusk. The ale bucket is lowered into the cool corner where the dog won't find it. Someone thanks God. Someone thanks the woman with the ladle. Someone thanks the pig in advance. You stand, lick a thumb, rub a bit of soot from a child's cheek, and feel the meal slide into your arms and legs as will, if not strength. Calories against collapse. That is the mathematics of breakfast, the whole curriculum in a bowl. You have eaten enough to carry wood, to turn earth, to shoulder hay, to bleed without fainting. You have not eaten enough to tell a story about luxury. You have eaten enough to survive another hour, and hours are the only coins the day takes seriously. You put the spoon back on its peg, the bowl back on its nail, your feet back into their patience. The door opens. The air is the same as ever, rude and real. You step out with bread in your belly and smoke in your hair, and the knowledge that you will be back here, with the same pot and the same prayer, when the sun is somewhere else in the sky. You dress in a mood, not a color. The mood is damp. The hut never quite lets go of its weather, so your one outfit, your only outfit, wakes each morning with a clammy opinion. First, the skin shirt, if you've got linen. A shift or smock, plain as truth, cut from cloth that took a field of flax and weeks of back, breaking to birth. It's meant to be mercy between you and the wool, a thin truce that wicks the sweat and keeps the itch at courtly distance. But your shift has seen harvests rise and fail. The armpits are polished to shine, the cuffs grey with years, and there's a patch where the lie bit too hard last wash day and left the fibres sulking. Over that goes the wool, because wool is what the world is made of once you step outside. A tunic if you're him, a kirtle if you're her, never quite dry, always smelling faintly of its original owner, which is to say sheep. Sometimes the lanolin still whispers when rain wakes it. Mostly the fullers beat that kindness out with clay and urine until the cloth is tight as grudges. The cut is honesty itself. Rectangles, triangles, and faith. Cloth is dear. Curves are expensive. Tailors are for people whose names carry farther than their footsteps. So you wear geometry, softened by years to your shape, the elbow shining like river stones, the seat grown smooth with work and sitting, the hem tattier than you pretend not to notice. Your belt is a line that tries to make sense of you, leather if fortune smiled, rope if it didn't. Pouches hang from it like decisions. Knife, flint, a twist of salt you shouldn't squander, a rag that might once have been a sleeve. If you're lucky, a hood with a liripipe to wind round your neck when the wind calls you unkind names. If you're a woman married to modesty and weather, a wimple or veil to keep hair from the pottage and men from their imaginations. Head coverings are less fashion than economics. They keep heat in, grease out, and nits embarrassed. Feet first? Sometimes not at all. Bare souls know the lane, like a psalter knows a monk. Every verse, every stone, every wet surprise. When you do wear shoes, they're turn shoes, simple, hand-stitched leather that tries to remember being a cow and mostly succeeds once it rains. Rawhide laces sulk open unless you talk to them. In winter, straw stuffed inside pretends at insulation. For town mud and midden rivers, there are Patton's wooden overshoes that lift you a saint's thumb off the filth and make you walk like you're arguing with the ground. Socks as a notion exist, but your reality is foot wraps. Strips of cloth bound like a promise, shifted through the day to move the blister somewhere new. Everything itches, not poetically mechanically. Lice don't care for sonnets. They are the democracy of the Middle Ages. Crowned heads and pig boys scratch with equal abandon. Bedbugs are landlords who never fix the roof and always raise the rent. Fleas declare jubilee on your ankles whenever the weather hints at mercy. There are ways to fight back that history will never call glamorous. A louse comb of bone or boxwood, fine-toothed and patient, march through hair over a sheet so the execution can be seen. Nitpicking in the firelight, the original family bonding exercise. Garments smoked over the hearth until everything living inside them decides to move to a nicer house. If someone mentions sulfur, they've got a patron or a priest for a cousin. Washing is not cleanliness, it's a campaign. There is no fouler phrase than wash day, because it announces a day you cannot spare. First, water, fetched, not conjured, hauled in yokes from a well that sulks down the lane. Heat it with wood you stole from your future self. Then the bucking. Clothes packed into the tub, ash lye poured over them until the liquid bites the skin the way truth bites pride. You leave them to steep while you beat yesterday out of blankets with a paddle, heel your way through sheets against a board, and try not to think about your back. Soap exists, a soft, mean thing made from tallow and lye, but it's coin you'll need later. Most of the time, ash does the scouring, clay does the degreasing, and elbow does the rest. Rinsing is in the stream if you're village, at the well if you're town. Either way, the work is cold and the gossip is warm, and both are necessary. Then the drying, which in this climate is less a state and more a negotiation. Hang the linen high where smoke can complete what sun won't start. Spread the wool where it can steam and not shrink itself into a tunic fit for a hopeful child. There are hazards in virtue. Lye eats holes, the stream eats buttons, winter eats fingers. You dry the shift on the line, and it freezes into a stiff white theology that preaches at your hands. You bring it close to the fire, and it takes on the perfume that never leaves. Smoke, mutton, ash, your life. You discover that clean in this world is not a smell. It is a condition of having tried. Patching is not shame, it is literacy. Every house can read a garment. The knee tells you who kneels to weed and who kneels to pray. The sleeve tells you which arm scythes hay and which cradles children. You save every rag because they are words in a language you'll need to speak in winter. Elbow patches breed cousins. The seat patch has a patch. The patch on the hem invents a new hem. Mending is evening work by bad light, needle licked, thread knotted, eyes narrowed till the seam stops wandering drunk. Darning socks, or rather, foot wraps with a darning egg if you've won, a fist if you don't, is a promise to your future feet that you will not abandon them to the lane entirely. When things die beyond resurrection, you cut them into bands for binding, swaddles for a new mouth, or dishcloths to keep grit out of supper. Cloth never truly ends. It only changes its job title. Smell is biography. You carry your household with you, like saints carry relics. There's the smoke that never leaves your hair, because the fire never leaves your house. There's the salt-sour tang of dried sweat waking when rain returns it to memory. There's the animal note that lives inside old wool and gets louder in summer. If you're lucky, there's a whiff of rosemary twigs burned in a pretend at purification. If you're not, there's the honest musk of work, your own and everyone you love. You learn to read others' lives with your nose. Tanners walk past like arguments, fishwives like low tide, fullers like a rumor you don't repeat indoors. You do not judge. Your own smell is a choir. Their own is an anthem. Together you make the town's hymn. Colours tell on you. In theory, sumptuary laws murmur about who may wear scarlet or fur or silk. In practice, the law judges your purse before it touches your sleeve. Your world is the brown of undyed wool, the grey of rain-plagued linen, the green and blue of woad when somebody owed you a favour, the red of madder if a cousin works near a dyer and looks away. Black is expensive unless it is accident. White is virtue until you step outside. Furs exist as heat, not vanity. Rabbit if you caught it, lamb if the year allowed, squirrel if you have nimble friends in a forest, the kind of collar that keeps life inside your chest in January. A cloak is a house you tie around your neck. A mantle is a bed that walks with you. Clothes are property more than personality. They are bequests in wills, dower in marriage, collateral in trouble. A good cloak is a loan with interest. A spare shift is insurance. A line in a ledger, written not with ink but with promises. When people die, neighbours remember them in cloth. She left me the blue kirtle with the mended sleeve, which is to say, she left me a winter fewer degrees cruel. Before that day, careful folk write their names into their garments with marks and cuts because laundry days at the communal trough turn honest people into temporary magpies. Chafe is a constant colleague. Wool at the neck rubs a sermon into your skin. The belt finds your hip with the accuracy of long habit. Hose, if you have them, bite at the crease of the knee like a sullen dog. In summer, your thighs make their own sad music. In winter, chilblains bloom like wicked roses around your toes and fingers, red testimonies that life can be painful and also boring at once. You learn salves, goose, grease for cracked heels, tallow for hands that remember lie, spit for small cuts because it's quick and yours. Someone swears by plantain leaves, someone else by God. Both work if you believe in them long enough to give your skin time to heal. You do not undress to sleep. You repurpose. The cloak becomes a second roof when the first weeps. The hood a pillow when the straw forgets kindness. The shift the boundary between you and the damp sole of the mattress. In deep winter, the entire family is a garment, nested like spoons, heat passed along like gossip. On rare hot nights, you risk lack and peel down to linen, then wake to the selective enthusiasm of bedbugs who always vote for change. Here and there you see better. The Reeve's Sunday tunic is fuller at hem and hope. The priest's sleeves have secret pleats and the faint sweet smell of beeswax. The Lord Steward wears scarlet in winter because law is a coat and not everyone fits. But even the rich itch, different itches, carried under softer linings. The cough of smoke is democracy, and fleece is hierarchy's common tongue. You look down at yourself before you go out. The smock is clean enough to read. The kirtle agrees to hide the worst of your reality. The belt remembers its hole. The shoes will do a morning. You scratch and scratch again, and feel the day already thinking about you. What you wear wears you, rubs you into its weave, until the two of you are one story, of weather, work, water hauled and poured, of nights spent seaming, of mornings spent picking tiny despots from seams. It is not fashion. It is climate. It is not costume. It is architecture. And like all buildings you live in too long, it learns your habits and you learn its creaks. Step outside. The air bites. Your clothes bite back. You smile, not because any of this is funny, but because gallows humour is a garment too, and today it fits. Open your mouth, and a century falls out. The first breath you take in the morning is not air so much as archaeology. The layered tang of last night's pottage, the wool-sour fug you sleep in, and the metallic whiff of gums that have been at war for years. There is no toothbrush waiting by the hearth, no soft mint promise. If you are careful, you keep a sliver of cloth to rub along your front teeth, a pinch of salt or ash to freshen, a twig shaved to a soft brush at one end, so you can worry at the line where tooth meets tartar. Some swear by sage rubbed on the gums, or a rinse of wine or vinegar if the household is feeling medicinal. A few, with an apothecary for a friend, have a powder of crushed charcoal and herbs that makes the mouth briefly smell like a garden set on fire. You do what you can, which is mostly nothing. Your teeth start old. Bread is your calamity and your companion, milled on stones that shed their own invisible weather into the flour, so each hunk is laced with grit fine as ground oath. You chew through that for years, and your enamel thins like patience. The poor eat coarse loaves bulked with husk and sometimes worse. The rich eat white, soft manchet. Fewer stones, more sugar when they can get it, and discover rot by other means. Honey sweetens most lives. Sugar is a spice, not a staple. Shaved in glittering slivers from a solid loaf at the apothecary and priced like a sin. Nobles press it into comfits and pastes. Physicians prescribe it as medicine, and teeth thank no one. Either way, the ending is similar. The fronts file down, the molars cup and crack, the brown creeps, the little dark caves arrive, and the ache begins to keep a diary. Halitosis is social weather. You breathe it from others and into them, a communal climate that makes candles work overtime. People manage as they can. Parsley after meat, if fortune smiled. A clove if you can afford to pretend you're a merchant. Chewed fennel seeds at Christmas when the priest isn't looking too closely. The very rich wear silver toothpicks on chains, little status commas they flick between sentences. The rest pick with quills, thorns, knives that should not be trusted inside mouths. There is no privacy to any of this. Picking teeth in company is not rude, it is optimistic. The scullion watches you from the corner and scratches his scalp with the same hand. No one blushes. When pain arrives properly, it does not introduce itself. It moves in. A dull throb that wakes to hammers. A hot nerve that screams to music only you can hear. You cradle your jaw like a child and whisper bargains to saints you have ignored all year. Remedies are a string of hopes. Warmed beer held on the sore tooth. Poppy, syrup, if a neighbour once carried for a physician and borrowed, an extra dram. A poultice that makes your cheeks smell like bruised herbs and desperation. Someone swears there is a worm in the tooth and shows you the trick with henbane seeds smoked under a cup to coax the little devil out. You do not quite believe in toothworms. You also do not believe when it is 3 a.m. and you have counted every heartbeat for an hour. Teeth do not ask permission to kill you. An abscess is a small private hell that sometimes opens a side door into a larger one called sepsis. You can feel the heat under your jaw, the tender swelling along the bone, the fever that comes on like weather and then burns with opinions. There is no antibiotic, only chance and prayer and the stubbornness of your body. People die of a swelling in the mouth, of the jaw ill-humoured, of evil blood. Sometimes they live, and the pus finds its way out, and a foul taste announces dawn. Sometimes it does not, and a week later a good person is in a shallow grave with a mouthful of unfinished business. So you go to the barber, who believes in letting and lather in equal measure. His shop smells of soap, sweat, and old iron. His sign is a striped pole that announces he is as ready to cut throats, for phlebotomy, as beards. He has tools with names that sound like they were invented by men who did not like poets. Forceps, lancets, a pelican, a cruel little crank of a thing that pries a tooth sideways from its covenant with your skull. He examines you with the brisk tenderness of someone who has seen more mouths than a priest, presses a thumb under your jaw, and nods as if you have presented him with a knot he knows how to untie. There is no anesthetic beyond what you brought in your courage and what he pours into a cup. He can dull you with ale, thicken you with wine, murmur something about henbane or mandrake if he's the sort to dabble, but mostly he trusts speed and habit. You grip the arms of the chair and the edge of your own resolve. He wedges, braces, twists. There is a noise you will remember during every storm for the rest of your life. A wet crack like a stick breaking in a bog, a moment of white heat like a forge door opening, and then it is done maybe. Sometimes the tooth shadow remains, little roots like stubborn family that refused the eviction. Sometimes he goes back in with a hook to argue with them individually. He spits on the floor, not because he is rude, but because blood makes men spit. He shows you the trophy if you want to see. Sometimes he shows the room. Tooth drawing at fairs is entertainment. A man in a bright coat stands on a barrel, and promises painless marvels with a patter as fast as his hands, a trumpeter at his side who will drown your screaming with enthusiasm. People gather because people always gather when somebody else is going to suffer publicly. He pulls a tooth from 1, 2, 5 mouths like a magician's endless handkerchief, wipes the iron on his sleeve, flourishes like a knight, and gathers coins while the dazed and bleeding remember their own feet. You think he is a fraud until your next Sunday night is 4 hours long and your pillow is wet with apologies. Next market day you watch him again, and when he looks at you, you find you have already climbed the barrel. Afterwards, you hold your jaw and your coin purse in the same hand and do not let go of either until you get home. Not every mouth is a ruin. Some people nurse what they've got with the discipline they give to fields. Cloth, rubbing morning and night, toothpicks after meals, wine, rinses when they can steal a swallow, avoiding the sweetmeats even on saints' days. A few households keep a little tin with sage leaves dried to powder and salt pounded to needle grit, rubbed along the gum line until it bleeds politely and feels clean. In towns, you sometimes see grooming sets that hang from belts. Ear scoop, nail knife, pick, tools for the canal, work of being human. They help. They do not save. The class lottery medals. Great houses can afford sugar and physicians and still produce smiles like ruined cemeteries, soft food, rich pastes, candied almonds served like love letters, and the black stubs that answer. Poor mouths are filed to flat plains by millstone grit and hunger's grind, and still manage to keep a few pillars standing into old age. Your grandmother's mouth is a geography lesson gaps like valleys, a single lonely molar like a hill left after the sea went elsewhere. She tongued it like a rosary bead the year it finally left her. She still eats apples when they come into the world again, slicing them thin and pressing the slices against the roof of her mouth with a thumb patient as prayer. There is etiquette to misery. Lovers learn to kiss sideways, to breathe like conspirators. You face away at night because courtesy survives even in huts. People talk in church with their lips closed to keep the fug polite. There are jokes about fasting breath, about ale breath, about the sacristan's garlic, about the reeve whose teeth are so far gone even lies fall through. A juggler at a feast flips knives, and then a set of false teeth carved from boxwood, an expensive joke nobody laughs at with their mouth open. And there is compassion. Because you have had the night of the hammer in your jaw, you do not laugh when the baker steps out of the oven house holding his face like a widow. You bring him the sage, the ash, the little cup of warmed ale you once despised, and you sit with him until the sweating stops. You remember that mouths are the first gates to fail in a hard land, and you praise anyone who keeps theirs for 40 winters. A last clean aside before you step back into the long ache. Sweetening in your century is a spectrum. Honey is ordinary miracle. It clings to spoons and childhood, and even bees have priests. Sugar is a foreign prince Cyprus, Sicily, the Levant, sold in loaves hard as sin and scraped like penance, good for impressing guests and ruining enamel. Bread is the quiet assassin. Stone grit in flour wears teeth flat. Flat teeth crack. Cracked teeth fester. That is the maths of your mouth. You manage what you can. You chew on the left because the right is singing. You carry a pick. You keep a rag. You joke when you can and groan when you cannot. And one day you wake and the ache is gone. Sometimes because the tooth has died and taken its opinion with it. Sometimes because you bought a performance on a barrel. Sometimes because fever came and went and left you still here, with one less white stone in your personal wall and a new respect for anyone who can smile at all. Then you drink your morning small beer with the care of a saint handling relics, and you go to work. Because nothing in this world waits for your mouth to feel better, and everything in it expects you to keep talking, chewing, singing, swearing, praying. You will. With whatever is left, work begins before the light has made up its mind. A bell turns the dark into obligation, and by the time the sky has remembered the color blue, you're already walking, breath smoking, boots sucking in the ruts, shoulders shaped by years of carrying what you cannot afford to drop. 6 days in 7, with the 7th often kidnapped by weather or necessity, because theology is one thing, and a field full of ripe grain staring down a storm is another. The village moves like a machine you can hear rather than see. Gate bars lifted, dogs shouted down, the first clack of querns for those who stayed back to grind. By the time the sun shows you its face, you've forgotten yours. The rhythm is older than the name scratched into the parish chest. Autumn plough where the earth opens like a book, and the ard draws its blunt letter through the page. Winter dung that steams in little parables. Spring sowing, a fist of seed walking the wind out of your hand. Summer weed, until the idea of a straight back is something you might have invented once for comfort. Then, the weeks that are not weeks but the harvest scythe, song and sweat, the air full of chaff and argument, the horizon a line of men and women bending and rising in time with the sun. In between, hedging, ditching, mending the harness that failed yesterday and will fail again in time, sharpening the sickle with a stone that has thinned like patience, repairing the cart floor with pegs you can make in your sleep, hauling muck from byre to strip, because the soil remembers everything you take from it and demands you pay in kind. You do not own your time. You rent it back from other men's rights. There is week work you owe the Lord too. 3 days on his domain strips for every day on your own, plus boon work when hay must come in, or barley stands like soldiers waiting for the enemy called rain. The steward counts not only sheaves but absences. He has ink, and an unforgiving way with it. Bread and ale sweeten the boon days, but do not mistake generosity for choice. The gift is the permission to stop at dusk. The tools are simple and unforgiving. The plough is a wooden verb, heavy with a little iron for a coulter, if fortune smiled this year. Oxen labour slow and sure, heads down like saints who have given up, asking why. You learn their moods better than your children's. You call them by names that would embarrass a bishop if bishops had to pull anything heavier than a purse. Harrows are thorn frames you drag over the broadcast seed to scuff it into secrecy. Your boots become the field's second harrow. In spring you lead the village children out like a clattering flock to scare birds, their voices and clappers stitching a fence in the air. They begin their apprenticeship at 5, stone picking, thistle pulling, carrying a pail without dissolving half of it into the path. Work is a family noun. Women do 2 shifts and call it a day, because the language has no word for the third. They are in the furrow, yes, cutting, binding, gleaning when they must and when they are permitted. But they are also the house's clock and cupboard. Up earlier, down later. Milk in pails warm enough to steam the hand. Butter coaxed from a churn with a rhythm that would shame a drum. Cheese turned and salted when the weather says now, not later. Spinning whenever hands are not otherwise chained. A distaff tucked like a second spine. Thread winding from fleece to future shirts, while gossip ties up the loose ends of the parish. Brewing, to the alewife's art-scalding mash tuns, laying down small beer so the household doesn't drink the ditch. Water hauled, wood fetched, rushes gathered and peeled, children kept alive through the strange mathematics of too little and too much. In lambing weeks, the midwife walks both byres and birth beds. Her hands know how to turn life by the ears and make it come the right way. Artisans are not spared by the walls over their work. The smith wakes and breathes charcoal for a living, a black snow that writes its own epitaphs on lungs. His day is glow and hammer, bellows and water shriek, iron bright enough to make you look away. The tanner lives downwind on purpose. Pits of urine and dog dung, oak bark tannin like bitter tea for hides. Men with hands the colour of work and a smell that enters a man's life and refuses to leave even when he does. Fullers beat cloth in vats of lye and stale piss until grease gives up and the cloth thickens. The air above the troughs is a sermon you can taste. Dyers stand in their woad like penitents, arms in blue to the elbow, a sky that has agreed to live under the skin. The The soap boiler tends cauldrons that spit caustic temper, and the chandler drags wicks through tallow until the whole lane smells like a butcher's dream of heaven. In each shed, the enemy is breath, too little, too hot, too foul, and the ally is a window you cannot afford to cut because winter waits with a hand on your shoulder. Weather is your co-worker and your tyrant. A fortnight of fine days in haying is a miracle. A shower that comes uninvited while the cut lies out is a little ruin that steals next winter's bedding from under your sleeping children. Drought bleaches, gossip and pasture both. Ewes stare at you like you invented the sky. A cold snap in blossom time is hunger you won't meet until Candlemas, tally-marked in the ache of empty barrels. Wind is always someone's enemy. The thatcher on the roof learning humility, the miller swearing because his stones will not turn, the sailor cursing a saint whose feast day has made him fat and lazy. Heat does not cancel work. You learn the trick of covering skin to keep it, of drinking slow, of not bending too fast, because the world will tilt and return with interest. Time is measured in bells and tasks. Matins hears you yoke. Prime takes you to the far strip. Terces the first proper bite of bread. A heel and a raw onion swapped in for luck. Sext is a quarrel because the sun eats reason. None comes with the small relief of shade lengthening. Vespers taste like ale if the steward's eye is elsewhere. Compline is the prayer you say with your knees. In harvest there are no hours, only the hand's width of shadow beneath a sheaf and the thud of carts rolling to the stackyard. Children sleep where they stop. Men dream standing up. Women count loaves in their heads like a litany. A storm brewing black in the west is a sentence the village understands without a priest to translate it. You cut faster. You cut until your hands forget how to be anything else. There are small mercies that keep a spine from snapping in the middle. The gleaning bell that rings after the Lord's men have taken their due, and the poor may walk and stoop and hope their winter will be less thin because of what the crows missed. The miller's joke, told for the 40th time, that finally makes itself funny. A lunch shared under the wagon. The bread soft for once because someone remembered to keep it wrapped in a damp cloth. The cheese not yet crawling with opinions. Your eldest comes back from scaring birds with pockets full of hedgerow treasure. A handful of blackberries, a feather, a cracked perfect snail shell. The way the field looks just after the last sheaf goes up. Stubble like close-shaved hair and the stack round as a promise. And there are the taxes you cannot count because they count you. Tithe of grain to the church. Tenth of lambs if the lambs survived wolves and weather. Tollage when some king wants to make France behave. The merchant for your daughter. If you can't pretend well enough, she is not old enough. The Lord's deer eat your young wheat, and you apologize to the deer with a fine. You mumble hatred into your sleeve, and save it for winter, when hatred is warm. Rest exists, but it negotiates. Sundays are quiet unless there is hay down or a line of cloud with knives in it. Feast days punctuate the year like commas, the village taking a breath before the next clause of work. But even saints prefer their cloth woven and their bread baked, so the looms do not fall silent entirely, and the oven's mouth still glows. At Michaelmas you count what grew and what did not. At Martinmas you salt what once had a name and now is called winter meat. At Christmas you eat as if joy were edible, and then remember joy is an appetite with a calendar. When the sun finally forgets you, the body continues a while without consulting your opinion. Hands keep the shape of their tool. The ache in your lower back stands like a guest who will not leave. The grit under your nails is the day arguing it still owns you. You unlatch the gate you latched at dawn. Notice the smear of blood on your palm, and cannot remember its origin. The lane home is shorter than the lane out by the length of a single thought, that you did what was necessary and will do it again tomorrow, because necessary does not get tired. In the doorway, the house looks at you with its one good eye of fire. The little ones tumble towards you with a noise that turns your bones back into something you can carry. You smell bread and smoke, and something trying to be soup. You wash your hands because there are rules even here, and you sit. And for a moment you are allowed to be a person whose name is not a list of tasks. Then the bucket needs filling, the pig makes its case in the yard, and a voice from the bed asks you if the barley looks like it will come good. You answer, because answers are another kind of work. And then you sleep, badly and completely, until the bell changes the dark into obligation again. Winter teaches you the price of a stick. Not a log, those are stories you tell yourself at Michaelmas about how snug you'll be just a stick. You reach for one, the right thickness for kindling, and somewhere in the back of your head a voice repeats the forest law like a catechism. Deadfall you may, greenwood you may not. Estovers if you're lucky, a fine if you're not. The Lord's deer eat freely, the Lord's wood burns only for the Lord. So you glean hedgerows, beg gorse and furze off commons, cut turves where the peat reeve will look the other way, and come home proud of a bundle that will vanish into 1 hour of flame and 3 of sulk. Fuel is not warmth. Fuel is time minutes of comfort bought with days of foraging and a little fear. Your house understands this economy and makes you pay twice. Without glass, the window is a hole with a rag for manners. The door fits like a rumour. The thatch weeps whenever weather remembers your name. You keep the hearth low because wood is coin, and learn the art of banking embers under ash so that the fire wakes with you, rather than needing to be born afresh like a troublesome saint. Smoke has nowhere civilized to go. In a cottage without a chimney, it shoulders up to the rafters, tars everything black, and cures hams, throats, and opinions with equal stubbornness. The good news, the soot keeps beetles out of the thatch. The bad news, it keeps lungs out of their proper business. On still nights, the air sits like a punishment. You crouch, you cough, you curse, and you pull your cloak tighter, because opening the door for relief is how you let the night in to count your bones. Cold is honest. It tells you exactly what it plans to do. Fingers go stupid, feet turn to wood, water stiffens in the bucket, and your breath makes a ghost of you. You learn to sleep in a heap, husband, wife, child, and whatever pig is on loan to the house this year. Bedfellows are not romance, they are insulation. You line the bed with straw and change it as often as you can, which is to say, not often, and you learn the trick of placing a hot stone wrapped in cloth at your feet before sleep, so you'll wake with toes that still belong to you. You wear your one outfit day and night until it remembers your shape better than you do. In winter, no one pretends to be clean. Clean is expensive because clean is hot. Damp is a sneak. It doesn't freeze, it insinuates. A raw wind will chafe a face and then pass. Damp moves into walls, blankets, joints, and temper, and unpacks its trunk. It calls itself rheum in older mouths, and ague in official ones. And the cure is always dry, which is a joke when the sky has taken to drooling. A damp shirt will hurt you more than an empty larder. A wet shoe will ruin a week. The floor remembers last night's leak and grows a thin green logic on the north side of things. Bread turns sullen. The thatch sprouts opinions. And in the long weeks when the world sits in a low cloud, you live inside a dog's breath and tell yourself spring will be less personal. Water doesn't help. The ditch is a brown autobiography of the village's day. The stream looks prettier than it is. Upstream of your thirst, there is always somebody else's answer to theirs. A pig carcass from where the river bends, a tanner's rinse, a child's unceremonious offering. You have wells, yes, and mostly they keep their promises. But the soak away from the midden has a long memory and a patient underground walk. So you drink ale at breakfast without bragging about it. Not a feast day drunkard's ale hops are a foreign habit anyway, but small beer, weak and quick, boiled in its making, and safer than what the swans approve. Children drink it. The priest drinks it, and then scolds you for drinking it. You nod and refill his cup. Bathing has rules. You learn the way you learn the liturgy, by repetition, and because getting them wrong hurts. There are bathhouses in towns, stews they call them, with tubs and steam and laughter that the moralists hear like sin. The church scowls, the bailiff collects, and on plague years they shut the doors and say it's for your soul, though everyone knows it's for your skin. In a cottage, a bath is an event the size of a market day. You carry water until your shoulders swear at you in a language all their own. You light a fire as if heat were a guest you can coax with flattery. You boil in a great posnet until the lid chatters. You fill a wooden tub that has dried and gaped since the last time, and must be persuaded to swell tight. Someone always sits first to find the leaks. Someone always yelps. Then bodies in order of rank and age, hottest water to the oldest bones. The baby a pink afterthought when the steam has gone thin and the tub smells like a compromise. You come out feeling like a goose ready for the oven. And if you're wise, you stand by the hearth until the damp has fled your pores. Pores are the battleground. The physicians will tell you, and then bleed you for the telling, that heat opens them to the air, and the air is full of invisible wrongness, miasma, bad vapours, the world's stale breath. To bathe is to unbutton the body and invite God knows what in. To sweat from work is one thing, honest, earned, the body proclaiming its own weather. To sweat from a tub, then step into a draft, is to write out your own funeral expenses. So you sweat in the broth of your own life and call it prudence. Clean, properly clean, is for weddings, monthlies if you can swing it, and the kind of sickness that makes you ready to gamble. Otherwise, a good rub with a linen rag, a little ashlie on the hands, a comb dragged through a head of ideas and lice, both that's hygiene. The nose learns to throw a veil over things. The bathhouse, when you dare it, is a different theatre. A stew in Southwark or any busy town advertises heat and company. You pay for a tub, for a ladle of hot water from a boy who has more scars than patience, for a bench smooth as old bone. You sit shoulder to shoulder with merchants and journeymen and women who laugh too loudly for the comfort of the devout. Steam stitches, strangers together, and unpicks them again. There is gossip, there is business, there is what the preacher calls temptation, and the midwife calls work. In good years, it's convivial. In bad ones, the doors are shuttered, and a notice says plague, and even those who like to tut at scandal look wistfully at the rising steam and miss their pause. Fear of cold makes you hoard heat like a miser hoards coins. You bed down early, you eat what is heavy, you keep your work indoors where you can, you make a friend of the pig because it is warm now and bacon later. You mend by the fire and call it a craft night. Even the church agrees that God can hear prayers thrown from under a blanket. You save the thin shoes for saints' days when the procession is short. You tell the children the story of the winter when the ale froze in the barrel, and grandfather chipped it out like amber and ate it with a spoon. Everyone laughs and wraps their shawls tighter. Fear of damp rearranges the furniture. You tilt the bed so the mattress will air, instead of bloom fur on its underside. You hang shirts by the fire and live with smoke, as if it were a lodger paying low rent. You lift lids often, because mold likes what you forget. You open the door for a cross draft on afternoons when the rain is merely thoughtful rather than committed, and you close it again before the pause can argue. You make rules about wet feet and mean them. You scold a boy for sitting down in dew as if he had stolen the church silver. You bless a day of wind as if it were money. Water is work, even when you refuse to drink it. There are barrels to catch the honest rain, and then lids to keep the birds from baptizing it. There are buckets that split in frost, and must be bound with a hoop or a prayer. There's the bitter arithmetic of laundry. How many shirts can you spare for a day of boiling and beating when the river will numb your hands to the wrists, and the soap will gnaw your knuckles raw? There's the scalding accident that everyone in the lane has either suffered or watched. The kettle snatched by a toddling hand. The scream that edits a family for years. Clean is brave. Clean is dear. Clean is, in a certain light, dangerous. So you keep to the middle path the village has learned over centuries. Enough heat to make life possible. Enough dirt to keep the body's gates politely closed. Ale for thirst, boiled by its nature and honest in its weakness. Bath when you must, wipe when you can, boast about neither. When you lie down you aren't clean and you aren't warm. You are something more useful. Alive, with enough wood saved for morning and enough small beer left to bless breakfast. Outside the thatch will weep, or the frost will write its name on the bucket. Inside, the embers wait under their ash for your hand to coax them back into being. You sleep in that knowledge. It isn't comfort, not exactly, but it will do. You don't see a doctor. You survive a consultation with the age. First, the house tries. A poultice of bread and milk that goes sour as it comforts. A little honey if the bees forgave you this year. A posset warmed at the hearth and blessed by someone who remembers the right psalm. If your fever writes its name across your skin anyway, the village escalates. A wise woman with a bag of simples and the authority of having buried fewer patients than she healed. An apothecary in town who sells courage by the dram and senna by the ounce. A barber with a basin, a blade, and a sign that says, "Let me rearrange your humours." And, somewhere between all of them, a priest who can't set a bone but knows the fastest road between a bed and a mercy. The learned theory is tidy and confident. You are a barrel of 4 fluids. Blood, yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and virtue is balance. Too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry. Your temperament skews, your body complains, and the cure is subtraction. The physician, Latin, velvet, fleas, consults his authorities, Hippocrates, Galen, Avicenna, then your urine. He holds the glass up to a window. A whole art lives there. Colour wheels, rings, sediments, the way the morning light threads through the pale gold. If he is fashionable, he might even taste it. You tell yourself you didn't see that. He decides you have excess of heat, of moisture, of something invisible with Latin dignity, and prescribes what medicine does best in this century, making you lighter. Bleeding is the favorite. There are charts for it. The zodiac man with stars pricked into his elbows and ankles, the phlebotomy calendars that marry your vein to the moon, because every act should look like knowledge even when it's a guess with a cloak on. The barber-surgeon, English, leather apron, fees that sting less, binds the arm until the vein stands like a boast, wipes the skin with a rag that is cleaner in intention than in fact, and opens you with a fleam or lancet. The bowl takes its ounce after ounce. He watches the colour thin and watery, phlegmatic, thick and ruddy, sanguine, and nods, as if a mystery has agreed to be simple for once. If you sway, that's good news. The body is yielding. If you faint, better news. The therapy is working. If you die, the diagnosis was sound and heaven impatient. Behind his chair there's a jar of leeches that look like punctuation marks arguing with fate. He can stick 2 behind your ears for headache, 1 on your hemorrhoids for justice, a whole flotilla along your ribs if the cough has learned your name. A leech nurses decorously and drops off fat and pleased. You go home whiter and instructed in humility. Purging is for those who prefer suffering from both ends to only one. The apothecary sells aloes, scammony, rhubarb if the caravan made it, wormwood, powdered this and that from a shelf that smells like a garden's ghost. The prescription reads like poetry and acts like artillery. Emetics for what rises, clysters for what doesn't, a pig's bladder, a reed, warm fluid, modesty murdered in the name of health. If your belly loosens and your temper improves, credit the doctrine. If you spend a night folded over a bucket while the house pretends not to hear, chalk it up to the cheerful price of being balanced. Surgery, when a knife must tell its truth, is the barber's province and the patient's legend. Do not picture clean steel and silent white rooms. Knives are heated because that's what makes a wound stop arguing, not because anyone believes heat kills invisible enemies. Invisible enemies belong to theology and the night, not to physic. A red-hot iron hisses on skin and declares the lesson learned. A cautery stick stinks of burnt hair and effectiveness. Splints are clever. Trepanning is a last resort that sometimes miracle of miracles doesn't kill you. And amputations are rare enough to be stories because saws belong to timber, not to men. Stitches exist, coarse as twine and neat as the hands that do them. Salves exist, bear fat and resin and honey and prayers muddled in a mortar. Clean dressings exist in theory and good weather. If the wound turns sweet with rot, you will meet the priest anyway. About the priest. Medicine's worst, kept secret, is that everyone ends up in his queue eventually. He brings things no other trade can supply: absolution, last rites, the promise that the pain means something. He can also prescribe, not in ounces, in actions. Alms, to lighten the soul. A pilgrimage, to relocate the illness into miles. A night under a relic's shadow. Canterbury has healed worse. Walsingham is a specialist. Your local saint at the church door can handle simple cases of despair. A ribbon tied to a rood screen stands in for a ligament. A wax votive in the shape of your failing part burns in your stead. If you rise from bed, it was God. If you do not, well, it was God. Medicine loves an infallible final cause. You will hear talk of ordeals, and it is as well to put them in their place. The old legal tests, iron, water, fire, were choked off by bishops a century and more ago, but the habit of asking heaven to decide did not retire with the paperwork. Families still perform their private versions. If the swelling declines when the relic touches, we keep him at home. If it rises, we send for the surgeon. A mother will lay a feverish child beneath the altar cloth at night and read the morning's coolness as a verdict. Prognosis by ordeal, not in law but in hope, because a choice feels less terrible when God takes it. The hospital, if you reach one, is not a place where cures are stacked on shelves. It is a house of hospitality, beds in rows, a chapel at the heart, brothers and sisters who wash and feed and turn you so your sores don't make a second malady of the first. Monastic infirmaries are better than most. They have gardens where physic grows: sage, rue, betony, comfrey penned in by wattle and good intentions. They can promise warmth, broth, and the discipline of hours, which is sometimes all a body needs to remember how to behave. Surgeons make their rounds when they are allowed. Physicians graze the noble wards and speak Latin to one another over the beds like magistrates judging fish. You may wonder why no one ever boils a blade before it meets your skin or scrubs a hand as if cleanliness were a weapon. This is the aside the century cannot give you, but we can. Germs are a future's invention. The medieval mind has a different map. Illness follows smell, miasma, crowd, marsh, hot wind, bad air. And in fairness, it often does. Foul places host foul outcomes. Summer fevers come in waves with the stink. So you smoke your house against plague, hang herbs indoors, carry posies to bully the air into decency, and light fires to correct winter's lethargy. Morality fills the gaps where microscopes do not exist. If you sicken after a feast day, you should not have enjoyed so much. A sermon stands ready to connect your indulgence to God's tidy accounting. Invisible causes must have meaning. Meaning must be moral. It comforts the healthy and disciplines the sick. Astrology joins the chorus with charts and planetary hours. A physician may time your bleeding to Saturn's sour mood, or refuse to lance a boil while the moon is in the wrong house. This is not superstition to him. It is the sky's handwriting on the body's page. And if his timing happens to spare a vessel or a life, theory hardens into fact and is taught to the next apprentice. What does it feel like from the bed? Bleakly comic, if you live long enough to appreciate the joke. Everyone who touches you is sincere. The barber is proud of his fast hands, the apothecary of a mixture that only ruins you a little, the physician of a horoscope that explains why you needed ruin in the first place, the priest of your soul's new polish. If you rise, they were right. If you sink, they were righteous. The ledger balances either way. And yet, between the leeches and the Latin, there are things that help. Warmth, rest, clean linen, if a sister likes you, broth, honey, poppy, when the pain walks too loudly. The body, which knows its own business better than any book, often seizes those crumbs and makes a meal of them. You live in a world where medicine is an ordeal and recovery a grace. When you heal, you owe everyone. When you don't, no one owes you an apology. On the day you return to the field, lighter by a pint and heavier by a story, you'll tell it with a laugh, because laughter counts as a tonic the accounts forgot to price. And you'll tuck away one private lesson no authority taught, that the most reliable cures in this century are time, warmth, and people who aren't afraid to sit in the smoke beside you until the fever runs out of road. You eat because tomorrow is not guaranteed, and dinner is the daily jewel. Preservation is the first opponent. There is no ice house for the likes of you, no cool box, no kindly cellar that behaves like a winter. What keeps meat from turning is the same small trinity across half the century: salt, smoke, and cold air. The salt lives locked in a chest. It is wealth, wages, taxation, fights, doled with a solemn hand, because you can spend a year's security in a barrel. The smoke hangs from the rafters in brown ribbons and tastes of yesterday's fire. The cold air is the best of the three and the most treacherous. A mild week in December, and all your careful stringed sausages will begin to whisper. Fish is the church's solution and a butcher's grief. With Fridays and fast days stacked like paving stones to Easter and back again, the appetite for not flesh turns Europe into a network of barrels. Stockfish dried cod as hard as theology comes down from the north. Salt herring sails in their thousands of little blue coffins. If the brine is weak, no egg floating high to prove the salter's pride. Rot takes the cargo by the second fortnight. You do not say botulism, you say the bilious night, the cramps that fold a man like parchment, the flux that empties him until his voice becomes a dry sound. In a good season, the fish is safe because salt, not prayer, made it so. In a poor one, the prayer is for a fast that ends without a funeral. Meat is rationed by class and by calendar. A lord's table sees beef with a memory of the field still in it, venison that smells of privilege. Your dish sees pig when the pig cooperates and the saints permit. Sows farrow irregularly. Swine fever does not read almanacs, and churchmen count more fast days than a hungry man believes belong in a year. So you render fat when you have it. You salt the odd shoulder. You hang strings of intestines like blessings and boil them to humility. Offal is a sprint. Lights, pluck, liver, kidneys, the day's small riches must be eaten before the sun is old. They taste like victory, with a timer running. The stew pot never truly empties. It is a brown universe on the hearth, a perpetual broth that receives turnips and wants. A knuckle here, a cabbage there, yesterday's heel of bread. It is safety by arithmetic. The more hours it boils, the fewer enemies survive inside. But if the fire goes out storm, sickness, carelessness, and the pot sits lukewarm in a cold room, then yesterday will try to avenge itself upon you. You will learn to boil hard, to sour with vinegar when you can steal a mouthful, to salt like a miser whose god is preservation. Bread is the main course disguised as a side. On good years you can bully the miller into honest maslin, a mix of wheat and rye that behaves in the oven. In bad years the miller's stones put grit in the flour, your teeth know. The husks creep in, and the dough needs your knuckles more than you have to give. Baker's law says loaves should weigh true, and there are public weights and men with official scowls to prove it. The punishments are designed for spectacle. Pillory, tumbrel, shame served hot. This is why a baker's dozen is 13 better to overpay in loaves than underway in chains. But when the fields fail twice running, law follows hunger. You bulk the dough with beans, vetch, pea, bran, chestnut, anything the stomach will admit without a riot. This is the scarcity line all of you know without poetry. When wheat fails, you turn to maslin. When maslin fails, you turn to horse bread. When horse bread fails, you turn the hedgerow into soup. Rye is its own gamble. In damp summers, ergot takes the head's black horns where grain should be, and the wise try to winnow it out, and the tired don't. St. Anthony's fire follows, fingers that burn without flame, feet that forget the ground, visions that make saints of the terrified and corpses of the unlucky. A village will remember the year by the colour of the bread and the screams it fed. Spice is a coin pretending to be food. Pepper weighs like wages. Cinnamon smells like a ship unloaded at Michaelmas. Saffron is a prayer you can taste. They do not mask rot, no one sprinkles cardamom on carrion at these prices, but they crown the dishes that can stand on their own feet. Still, a pinch in a pottage can dress poverty as festival. And if you see nutmeg on a neighbour's table, you know there is silver in the mattress. The salt, meanwhile, sits under lock. There are keys, ledgers, quarrels. In some lands, the very right to buy it is a tax with a name. Dairy is a clock. Milk is a dare measured in hours. Butter lasts longer if you work your arms to water. Soft cheese is a day's reprieve. Hard cheese are seasons. Rancid is a taste and a sin you forgive when the cupboard learns the language of echo. Children drink whey because waste is a luxury reserved for fantasy. The rest of you swallow and call it health, as long as it doesn't curdle your courage. Markets promise fairness and deliver stories. The assize of bread and ale posts its tables. The alewife swears her measures are honest. The beadles weigh, sip, nod, and sometimes take their bribe in kind. Cheap pies wink in alleyways, their steam smelling of comfort and undisclosed species. Pasty is a word with room inside it. So is hot, so is fresh. You eat standing because trust is not a chair. If you live to tell, the pie was meat. If you don't, it was meat with a grievance. Game is the forest's joke at your expense. The hare that lives in your imagination lives in the king's larder by law. Deer are not meat. They are venison, which is to say, a syllable guarded by men in green who prefer ropes to lectures. A snare is a theology in wire. You set it anyway, because the children's ribs are learning their names. Punishments make lessons. Fines, stocks, the slow theatre of losing a hand. In lean years, even good men turn poacher and call it prayer. God may forgive. Foresters do not. Pickles and brines are the poor cook's library. Vinegar is a scholar. It keeps cucumbers crisp, onions brave, cabbage from becoming a cautionary tale. But brine has rules. Not enough salt, and you have bottled regret. Too much, and dinner is a punishment. You learn the egg test from someone who learned it from a grandmother. If it floats with its eye up, you can trust the barrel to keep a promise. If it sinks, so will your hopes. Communal ovens save wood and create enemies. You prove at home, queue with your pail of dough, mark your loaf with a cut like a family's signature, and slide it into Monday's heat. If someone jostles the peel and your mark swaps places with another's, a week's food becomes a quarrel. The baker's boy swears he remembers whose was whose. He doesn't. You go home with a stranger's loaf and a domestic policy of pretending not to notice. Oil is mostly lamp and sometimes taste. Olive lives in books more than in bowls this far north. You cook in animal fat and swallow your scruple when yesterday's lard tastes of smoke and miracles. Rancid? Yes. Dangerous? Less than hunger. Taste bends to arithmetic. Flavor is a luxury that follows calories like a dog that knows when to stay outside. And through all of this, there is the choreography of scarcity and substitution. You trade a handful of onions for a clutch of eggs. You swap labor at slaughtering for a coil of sausage. You lend your salt and collect with gossip. The stew gets thicker as the wheat gets older. You pretend the chewiness is character. Children learn early that enough is a word adults say when they are trying not to cry. Dinner is not a plate, it is a plan. You eat with one eye on the pot and the other on the season, and somewhere in the back of your mind is a little accountant, counting saints' days and salting days and slaughter days, and days when the market might have a bargain, because a ship went down and the fishmongers are in a hurry to deny it. You do not ask if the food will kill you. You ask whether it will kill you slower than not eating. And when it doesn't, when the stew is hot, the bread is honest, the fish is salt, and not a lie, you feel a joy that would embarrass a king. You sleep on it like a blessing and wake already calculating breakfast. The day is not yours. It belongs to the bells. First, a thin thread in the dark matins and lords from the tower, iron on air, summoning the pious and the half asleep in the same tone. Then, as the light begins to guess at itself along the thatch, prime, later, turkey, sext. None little hammers tapping the hours into you whether you can name them or not. Vespers when the sky bruises, compline when the hearth goes low. You do not carry a clock, you wear one, a parish you can hear. And when the curfew bell rolls out across the fields, couvre-feu, cover your fire, you smother the embers and swallow the night. Time is not measured, it is obeyed. You live, if not by faith, then by choreography. The book, the one that explains why the weather is a rebuke and why your calf died on a saint's day, is written in a tongue that will never sit easily in your mouth. Latin keeps the covers on. You know your paternoster by muscle and chant, your ave by counting, your credo by the places your breath runs short. The stories reach you not by pages but by pigment. They climb down from the chancel arch. Saints with eyes like coals, Christ with ribs like reeds, a devil red, as a blacksmith's forge pulling sinners by their ankles. The rude screen is a painted fence between your daily mud and heaven's gold. If you squint through it, you see the priest at the mysteries, his back a wall of cloth, his voice a flock of syllables that sound like weather. The bargain is simple enough to write on a nail. Obedience for imagined safety. Pay, pray, and keep your head down, and perhaps the storm spares the barley. Perhaps the cough loosens its claws. Perhaps the child warms. This is not cynicism. It is arithmetic with angels. A bad harvest can be explained by sloth and sin, a good one by the saint whose image you help to gild. The cure for uncertainty is ritual. Processions beating the bounds at rogation tide, the priest, the men and the children who will remember with their skin, walking the parish limits, singing at stones and hedges, so the land knows its keeper and the keeper knows his God. The rent on your soul comes due in kind. A tithe is a tenth that feels like a quarter. You owe it in sheaves and lambs, in eggs, in jars, in honey so thick it clings to guilt. You carry it to the tithe, barnership of oak with great ribs, and a smell like damp straw and arithmetic, and stack your obedience under beams that look old enough to remember Noah. The priest has glebe-land. He has fees for hatches, matches, dispatches, baptisms, marriages, funerals, each coin with a prayer wrapped round it like a label. There is Peter's pence for Rome if the king is not quarrelling with the Pope that year. There is your mortuary when you die, the best beast, led away from your door like a parable with hooves. No one calls it rent. Everyone feels the cupboard breathe out when the cart goes home lighter than it came. Holy days interrupt labour without offering leisure. You lay down the hoe because the bell says lay it down, not because your back has signed a peace. Mass on feast days is not a nap. It is a duty, a pageant, sometimes a market of souls. Your stomach listens to the calendar as much as your ears do. Fasts stack up like cordwood. Lent, Advent, Ember Days, Vigils and fish becomes a word that stretches to include eels, beaver tail if you can make a priest laugh, and the ale that keeps the water honest. On certain days you may taste music. Church, ales to repair a roof or buy a bell. The green of the churchyard swelling with benches, jugs, and the sort of laughter people forgive when a saint is invoked. Charity is collected in public, so is shame. Because correction is theatre, the parish learns by watching. For fornicators and scandalmongers, there is the white sheet and the candle. You stand barefoot at the church door with a taper guttering hot wax on your knuckles, while the sermon uses your name like a bell. For blasphemy there may be a penance on the market day. a board round your neck with the word you should not have said, written in a hand that means to carve your memory. Perhaps a procession, perhaps a psalm. The archdeacon's court is a net for small fish. Slander, non-payment of tithes, missing mass, a child whose calendar does not match the wedding. You swear on relics with a mouth like wool, and the apparitor writes your life in a script you cannot read. If you cannot pay the fee for absolution, the sin remains on your account as if heaven kept books like a reeve. Heresy is a rumour with teeth. You have heard the tale from places with hotter summers and more soldiers. Some who argued doctrine ended at a stake, handed to the secular arm so the church could say it does not shed blood. That is far from your hedgerow until it isn't. A man with too many books, a woman with too much certainty, a circle that prays with its own words. It only takes one neighbour with a grudge and a friar with a zeal for everything to become exciting and terminal. Mostly, theology comes to you as a homily about obedience and a rebuke about ale. Mostly, you nod. Confession is accounting in whispers. Once a year by Lateran law, before Easter, you go into the box of silence or kneel at the screen and pour into a patient, practiced ear. The thoughts you tended like weeds, the meat on a Friday you eyed too long, the lie to the reeve, the fury at God when the fever took the baby. The priest gives you numbers paternosters, aves, a pilgrimage if he thinks your feet can carry it, and you go work them off like a fine. Easter is housel. The one time your tongue tastes heaven, and the priest reminds you with his gaze that this is a privilege you can fumble if you do not carry your soul with two hands. The church is also your news. The bell is the village throat. It rings for fire. It rings for flood. It rings the tocsin when a rider gallops in with a rumour that sounds like hooves war, tax, pestilence. It tolls a passing, slow, counted, the age of the dead folded into sound so neatly that you will know who it is before the name is spoken. It peals when a boy who should have died lives, when the roof does not fall, when the saint answers with rain in the 7th week. It is comfort and command. It is how the day knows itself. A sermon can be a scalpel or a cudgel. Sometimes the words are balm. Blessed are they that mourn over a long trench of quick burials. Sometimes they are a whip, a famine explained as punishment, a tax announced as obedience, a war blessed as if Christ had ever ridden a charger with iron on its face. It is hard to tell whether you believe or whether you cannot imagine a world where not believing would be survivable. In a hard month, the difference between the two things is a crack so narrow even a prayer would have trouble sliding through. It is not all fear. There is shape, and people are hungry for shape. Candlemas brings light into the dark weeks. Palms rustle on a cold spring Sunday. White linen lays clean over brown tables at Corpus Christi. Mystery plays pull saints and devils into the street and let children point at them without sin. A woman is churched after childbirth and welcomed back to the rhythm as if the altar were a door that swings both ways. Pilgrimage badges clink on caps, shells, ampullae, little tin Beckett heads, proof that someone you love once walked far enough to earn a story. But the ledger never sleeps. Sin has a price. Virtue has a price. Sometimes they share a purse. If you cannot read, you are read. Your life is narrated by men with books and seals. The parson, the summoner, the clerk who writes your name in a register when you are born, and writes it again when you are carried out under a sheet. To miss a bell is to be asked, later and loudly, why heaven found you elsewhere at that hour. To skip a tithe is to be found and cured of the habit. To speak inflammatory theology at a table is to be remembered by someone who prides himself on memory. The contract is not signed, it is lived. We bless the seed and scold the throat. We hold the rope and call it safety. We pay the rent on our souls because somewhere, behind the rude and beyond the Latin, there is a hope so stubborn. It survives all the arithmetic. When the last bell pulls the day shut, you count your prayers on your fingers and your debts in your head. Tomorrow will start with iron in the air again, and you will know your place by sound. That is the genius and the trap of it. The bells tell you what to fear, what to do, when to do it, and most dangerously when to feel safe. And when the rope burns through a sexton's palm and the clapper swings, you obey. Because the voice is old and the world is young, and men who ignore old voices often wake to find there are no new ones in the room. You are born into a story that was written before you could speak. And if you are a girl, the first chapter is short. Childhood is a sprint. Womanhood arrives early and without apology. Betrothal can be a mother's whisper and a father's handshake before your breasts have finished arguing with your ribs. 12 is legal by canon law for consent, 14 for boys. But law and life rarely meet in the same lane. Bargains, dowries, and land breathe heavier than your yes. Sometimes you like the boy. Often you like the saints more. The marriage is made in a porch with witnesses and God for notary, and then your name is wrapped in your husband's like cloth around a candle. Coverture, they call it later, one legal body, and it isn't yours. What you bring to the door linen, a pot, a cow if the stars were kind, goes into his ledger. What you keep is a promise called dower, a third in theory when he dies, though theory and uncles are famous liars. Until then you are wife within walls, a manager of hunger, a steward of warmth, a diplomat between cradle and granary. You brew ale because water conspires. You spin because everyone is cold. You barter because a prayer is easier to say with salt on the shelf. Your work is invisible only to those who never eat. Childbirth is the roulette wheel that returns every other year. There is no romance in confinement, there is planning. You stock rags and oil. You borrow the parish birthing stool. You put a knife of iron under the bed to frighten what cannot be seen. You tie and untie knots because somebody's grandmother swore it helped. St. Margaret's girdle, if a neighbour's cousin can borrow it from the next parish, is wrapped around your belly with a psalm and a hope. The room will change. Shutters closed, a curtain hung, a little church made of midwives, gossips, a whispering semicircle of women whose hands are older than you are. The men are out, or pretending to be. A midwife will test her palms against your pain and tell the gossips to put vinegar to your lips, heat bricks, boil water, for comfort, not cleanliness, and ready the blessed salt. If the child crowns blue and the priest is far, she has the right and the duty to wet a forehead with emergency baptism. Salvation takes seconds, and seconds are rare. Mortality is a number and a face. A labour that turns, a fever that rises on the third day, a womb that will not let go. Puerperal fever is a phrase you don't know, and a funeral you do. A pelvis narrowed by childhood hunger means the world can be too small for a baby's head. You live in a century where the cleanest instrument is breath and the sharpest is prayer. If you walk out of the room with a living child, and your own blood still staying where it should, you mark the doorpost with gratitude. 40 days later, you are churched, blessed back into the congregation, as if God and the village both needed reminding that surviving is permitted. When the baby lives, the baby drinks. Wet nursing is a market that has moralists for customers. Noble ladies hire, poor women hire out, and God is asked to arbitrate 1,000 little hypocrisies. Lactation spaces pregnancies. Theology argues with biology, and you quietly arrange your life around both. Cradle boards, swaddling, cradle songs, fever, tiny coughs, tiny graves. Your milk is politics, your womb is economics, your heart is a clock. If you outlive him, the story edits you again. Widowhood is exposure. There is a dignity to it that men praise, and a vulnerability they count on. Dower rights in parchment are one thing. The reeve with keys to the tithe barn is another. Wardship waits for minor heirs like a net. A neighbour with ready coin, or a lord with a long memory, will have suggestions for your remarriage. If you keep house on your own, you may be a femme sole by the custom of a market town and trade in your own name, sell ale, mend gear, hire a lad to carry sacks, and yet every contract is a question. Who stands behind you if it goes wrong? People will say your independence is admirable. They will also make sure it is temporary. Nunneries are walls of a different kind. Some girls go by choice books, psalms, a life measured in hours and gardens. Some go because a dowry buys less trouble there than in the world. A Benedictine house can hum with quiet power, an abbess with seal and steward, a scriptorium with good light, a herd of sheep that makes rich cloth. Later rules tighten. Enclosure like a spell, grills between you and your kin, obedience that tastes like safety on some days and like smallness on others. But there is learning in the air. There are women who can read and women who can answer back with chapter and verse. Anchor holds offer an edge case holiness. Julian in Norwich will come much later to write of love through a window in a wall, and for a few, the world is most survivable when it stops moving. If you stay in the world, you will become an expert in small economies and large silences. The law allows moderate correction. Nobody writes the word bruise, but they could, and neighbours will tell you which end of a bad month you can survive. Charivaris will come for scolds, and suspected adulterers with pots and pans like an orchestra of spite. A cucking stool will dampen reputations. The scold's bridle will make a public face out of your mouth. Some boroughs have better customs, some parishes better priests. The luck of your latitude decides how hard the rules bite. Witchcraft is a label that sticks to inconvenient women the way smoke sticks to hair. We are earlier than the bonfire-crazed centuries, but fear is a weed that learns quickly. Wise women cunning with herbs, deft with breech births, keepers of recipes that mix saints' names and willow bark, are gratitude and scandal in the same apron. A failed labour, a string of sick calves, a neighbour's envy, and suddenly the apparitor is writing your name. You will be asked where you learned your art. If you say, "From my mother," it is tradition. Say, "From a dream," and it is evidence. Bishops make midwives swear oaths not to trade in charms, and the women swear with clear eyes, then go home and whisper Ave Marias over nettle tea, because they know God listens harder when he smells honesty and rosemary together. If a storm ruins the barley and the men need a reason, they will sometimes invent one with your face. And yet, and this matters more than any ordinance, the women keep one another alive. The well is a parliament, the bake oven is a guild hall, the bench by the churchyard yew is an embassy of hands. You lend a comb before a feast day. You swap a pinch of saffron saved from a bridal cake for a sprig of rue when the baby will not settle. You take turns sitting up with a girl in her first labour, telling her, in the thin minutes between pains, what you wish someone had told you. You are godsibs, in the old senses gossip's kin in sacrament, if not in blood. You will carry each other's gossip and each other's dead. You will wet, nurse a neighbour's infant when she cannot. You will stitch a shroud for a friend with the same hands that held her while she birthed. When a midwife is hauled before a church court, the women of the parish will arrive with baskets and testimonies. This child lived because of her. This mother lived because of her. This oath on this relic is worth less than the bread she has baked for us for 20 years. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. They come anyway. You find slivers of authority in the crafts men ignore until they need them. Alewives keep the parish drinking and in trouble. Brewsters learn measures and malt, and the way the ale, Connor's lips twitch when he tastes a fine batch. Spinsters the word is a trade before it is an insult supply, the warp and weft of everyone's comfort, and a strong widow can keep a workshop humming as neatly as any guildsman if the wardens are sleepy and the neighbours talk sense. Markets will hear your price if you say it twice, and look as if you have a brother with a cudgel. There are girls who slip through. A clever one with an aunt in a town may apprentice to a silkwoman or a mercer. A fortunate one with a soft-spoken father may marry a man who treats moderate correction like a sin. A fierce one may take her dead husband's tools and simply not stop showing up at the site. Fortune is a ladder. it is also a ditch. You learn which edges hold. The humane truth, the one no ledger captures, is the way you hold each other in the dark. Candles guttering, someone's palm cupped around the flame while another woman's hands are slick with your blood. A lullaby sung low enough to hide the crying. A loaf left on a sill without a knock when your husband's anger has left your cupboard hollow. A shawl around your shoulders as the churching prayer is said, and the world is briefly kind. The rules of men are what they are. The rules of women, the ones carried in aprons and eyes, are why you are still here. Hard mode then, but not mute, not hopeless. You navigate a small compass with an intelligence that would shame a clerk if he knew what it was doing. You keep accounts in gossip and favors. You measure safety in faces and footfalls, and you spend courage like coin without calling it that. When the bell rings for compline and the house falls back into its night breathing, you lie on your straw and count the living. On many nights that is victory. On some, it is miracle. Tomorrow, the wheel turns again, and you will put your hands to it with the others. The first time you see a man in the pillory, you think you'll look away. You don't. No one does. The wooden frame swallows his neck and wrists. The constable reads the offence. Short wait at market, watered ale, a hand too free in a crowd, and the square answers with the only language it's learned. Turnips grown moral, old bones, a dead rat for flourish. Children laugh, apprentices aim with competitive precision, and someone hawks hot pies because every lesson wants catering. His face swells. A woman spits. A baker's false loaves hang round his throat as the assize makes a diagram of justice out of twine and shame. By dusk, the law has taught its class, and the town will buy bread tomorrow with an extra glance at the scales. Fear educates, cruelty orders. Punishment is not hidden here. It is staged. Whipping posts stand where lanes meet. Stocks are set deliberately low so passers by must step over the punished like a living threshold. The scold's bridle, a cage of iron with a tongue plate, turns a mouth into a sermon. See what words can cost. Ducking stools wait by the pond, wives called quarrelsome, lee wives accused of false brewing. Any woman who has angered a jury of men with time to spare, strapped, tilted, soaked. The crowd learns peace by humiliation's cold arithmetic. Ears can be cropped, cheeks branded with a letter that hardens into a career. A thief without fingers learns to carry his confession in open air. Mutilation is a memo you cannot mislay. Executions are theatre with God in the role of stage manager. The gallows stands where roads cross so travellers can read the law as they pass, like a grim signpost with a single verb. On hanging day, the town moves as one creature. Doors close, stalls follow the crowd like geese, and people climb cartwheels for a better view. The cart jolts beneath the condemned. The priest climbs up with him, psalm on his lips and garlic on his breath. The man says his last words, brave, bitter, maudlin, rehearsed by sleeplessness, and the rope writes the final sentence. If the sheriff is merciful, the hangman pulls the legs. If not, the village learns how long the human throat can argue. Heads can be spiked above the gate. Bodies may hang until weather remembers them to bone. Children will point and ask questions. Parents will answer in the vocabulary of safety. Don't be him. Not every judgment ascends to wood. Floggings stripe backs in the shire hall until the floor tastes of iron. In some boroughs, a baker guilty of fraud stands beneath the pillory, while his flour is poured over his head like a parody of blessing. In others, a butcher who sold diseased meat must carry the carcass through the streets, while bells are rung and laughter has an edge. Spectacle makes memory economical. The poor cannot afford pamphlets, the retina is cheaper. And beneath it, older bones, proof by ordeal. Retired in parchments after councils frowned priests. Forbidden to bless the water, the iron. Still stalks imagination like a familiar ghost. The logic remains even when the props change. Hot iron once measured innocence by the mercy of wounds. Boiling water made truth and infections gamble. Cold water tried to drown the devil out and called floating guilt. Now there are juries and inquests. But the craving to make God choose lingers in trial by combat on rare, starved occasions. A champion, a shield, a prayer, and the town's eyes sharper than any spear. Compurgation oath helpers with clean names works if your friendships run deep and your neighbors' consciences sleep soundly. In places where the old rites die slow, the line between proof and pageant blurs. You survive the test, and so must be innocent. You fail it, and so must be condemned. Either way, the crowd goes home with a story that begins, I saw. Violence is not only municipal, it lives in houses with doors that stick in winter. Moderate correction is the phrase that oils too many fists. The law nods to a husband's right to educate with a strap so long as bones remain bones, and neighbors develop the delicate art of hearing or not hearing, depending on who owes whom what. Yet the same street that watches a woman ducked will, on other nights, roar against a drunkard with rough music pots and pans, whistles, grinning masks until his shadow shrinks. A peace bond may be demanded by a manor court. Bring sureties or keep your temper. Parchment can sometimes do what pity couldn't. Guild halls have their own choreography of pain. Apprentices are beaten into skill, as well as into obedience. A master's belt is a syllabus. Schoolmen flog boys until the alphabet tastes like leather. In monasteries, chapter house penance can mean lashes counted out with psalms. The sound of the rod and the chant mingle, correction stitched to devotion. Church courts make theatre of repentance. A candle carried barefoot round the church on Sunday, a white sheet over a sinner at the porch. Words spoken aloud so salvation can be witnessed and neighbors can feel taller. Street violence hums under everything, like a pedal note. Alehouse quarrels bloom from nothing and end with a bench leg for a cudgel and a scar that will outlast the memory of the joke that sparked it. Feud simmer. Two families that will never buy bread on the same side of the market. Cousins who keep knives sharp for funerals. Town and gown rows make term-time sport in university towns, turning prayers into projectiles. Oxford will be spilling blood over bad ale within living memory, and Shrovetide footballs translate piety into bruises. Fairs magnify the risk. Drink, dice, strangers, a jostle at a dice board, and you are suddenly counting your ribs with your tongue. War is not an event here so much as weather. Musters drum the men out of bed. Sheriffs read writs with teeth in them. Purveyors take horses for the king's service, with promises that smell like rain. Chevauchés move like locusts, eating hay, thatch, poultry, patience. Routiers' masterless soldiers discover how to tax a parish without clerks. If you live near a border, you learn the shapes of burning from a distance. You hide your best tools and your second-best daughter. You do sums in sacks of grain and think like a river. Where will the soldiers march? Where will they bog down? You will see banners on the ridge one morning and learn a new lord by the end of the week. Peace is the space between harvest and arrears. Skirmishes bleed into work. A cart squeals up the lane with riveted men clinging to it like beetles. Your child counts the pierced banners the way other children count crows, quartering billets men in your loft. You discover how much a soldier eats when he is not the one paying. The priest prays for those who travel by land and sea, and means, among others, the bodies on the next hill, who will be nailed to your memory for a longer season than any saint's day. All of this has a logic the authorities will recite if you press them. Public pain is pedagogy. Visible suffering conserves resources. Imprisonment is expensive, and stone is precious. A fine is forgettable. A scar is a curriculum that follows its pupil home. They will say that order is a choreography, and the crowd must be taught its steps, where to look, where to jeer, where to fall silent when the rope goes tight. They will tell you that fear is cheaper than mercy, that a town kept modest by occasional terror is a town that pays on time and prays with attention. And your crowd learns the cues. It gasps on schedule. It throws with enthusiasm. It mimics in its anger the very grammar of the law it claims to despise. It takes fierce comfort in the clarity of a man made into a warning. You can feel the relief under the cruelty, the way a community exhales when sin has a neck to go around. For a few days after a hanging, purses sit deeper in belts and knives spend the week asleep. Then the old rhythms return. Because humans are humans, and bread still tempts and tempers still leak. There are moments, few and unfashionable, when the machinery jams. A condemned boy's mother faints, and the hangman waits. A judge can't meet a woman's eyes and finds parchment flexible. A crowd that came to watch a beating sees instead a person, and falls quiet enough to hear their own breath. But economy wins more often than sympathy. The stocks need occupants. The gibbet needs silhouettes. The calendar needs its little terrors to keep the big ones at bay. So you walk home from the square along a road that has learned all these lessons and forgets none. The wind smells of tallow and mud, and something metallic that won't leave your tongue. A child asks whether the man is in heaven. You say you hope so, and you mean it. You put your hand on your own neck, just for a moment, as if to check that the knot you wear is only the scarf against the cold, and not the rope of some future morning. Tomorrow there will be ploughing. Tomorrow there may be drums. Tomorrow the theatre will raise its curtain again, and the actors, state, church, crowd, you will hit your marks. You learn early that time here is not a road but a funnel. Wide at birth, so many babies. So many hopes and narrow very quickly. Children die like candle stubs in a draught. A cough lengthens. A fever learns your child's name. The priest comes with oil, and the small white wafer for a mouth that can barely swallow. Then the bell first, the passing bell when a soul is at the edge. Then the death knell once the crossing's done, and a tiny shroud that looks like laundry, not ceremony. The sexton's spade bites into ground that has met too many infants, and your hands remember the weight of a body that never grew heavy enough to complain about shoes. You go home via the lich gate without looking at the women who are already sewing, because there are always more seams to close than cloth to spare. Here is the demystifying line. The peddlers of romance skip. Life expectancy at birth sits low because death at birth sits high. Think 30-odd years on paper, but if you outrun the gauntlet of childhood, say past 5, past 15, you may see grey in your beard and ache for reasons more dignified than infection. The average is dragged down by the avalanche at the beginning. Survivors are not miracles, merely lucky and careful and never alone for long. But luck breaks like pots. A nick from a sickle fattens into something red and threaded. Splinters deliver lockjaw like an insult from the woods. A tooth goes bad and its poison walks your blood. You have seen a man fall under a cartwheel and rise with his ribs, thinking like kindling. You have watched a woman bleed after the midwife says it is finished, and the midwife is wrong. Childbed is a threshold that sometimes opens both ways. Mothers step through twice and do not come back either time. Men die loudly, beasts, mills, blades. War women die often, quietly, and in service to beginnings that never learn to speak. When plague comes, it edits the town with a butcher's efficiency. Bodies are not measured, they are counted. Funerals become arithmetic. The ordinances change like weather. No long watches, no processions, no crowding at the graveside. The bell still rings, though sometimes more than one rope must be pulled because the air is full of endings, and metal must keep up. Pits forget names. Shrouds run out and sheets become doctrine. The priest's Latin thins to a skimmed version of mercy so that everyone gets some. In thinner years, the ordinary misery between the famous one's death still hurries. There is no embalming, no artful delay. The body wants to go back to the general stock, and the parish lets it. A night at most, candles if you can buy them, a watch if neighbours will sit. The corpse is washed, eyes smoothed shut with a thumb, jaw tied with a ribbon that might once have been an infant's cap string. Someone puts a coin in the mouth, if they remember stories older than the priest. Someone else disapproves. The winding sheet is pinned. The parish beer creaks like an old complaint. A scrap of cloth becomes a pall, if a family can manage it. The church path is a map of all the ways people leave. Fees arrive like crows at every stop. The mortuary dues for the soul, the mortuary heriot for the Lord your best beast, because death pays the rent as faithfully as you ever did. If you cannot spare a cow, a cloak will do, or the second best pot, or the winter boots someone else must now wear. The churchyard fills the way a ledger does. Rows, dates, a memory of sums. Wood markers lean, rot, vanish. Stone is for those with lists of surnames and money to carve them into rock. When the sexton runs out of parish, the bones are lifted to the charnel house, a clean and practical room where skulls grin without insult and the living grow wise or merely quick-eyed. Funerals themselves are thin in a hungry place, but not unmade. The psalms do their work, plainchant sawing the air into steady lengths. The priest makes the sign and says the words that teach the earth to recognize this one and not another. A handful of soil falls like a small, formal mercy. Some parishes hold the arvel, the burialalia shared bread, a cup that tastes of sorrow and community, an accounting of the dead man's debts and the living's promises. Even in grief, administration is a sacrament. You note the small economies of dying as carefully as you do those of bread. Keep a shroud ready. Keep a bit of wax aside for a candle. Make sure the paddock gate will open for the heriot herd. You learn the routes sorrow takes, so you can stand out of the way of its hooves. And yet, every time the bell lifts its voice, something in you startles afresh. Familiarity breeds numbness only in stories told by the comfortable. In practice, each absence is shaped like its owner. Not all endings are tragic. Some are simply finished. An old man with a back like a question mark who has been saying goodbye to his barley for a year finally stops waking in the night to count the winter stores. A widow who learned to make decent ale teaches a girl the trick of the mash and then goes to sleep without complaint. In summer, you see the procession drift past in dust motes and bee song and think, someone has died as a tree dies, leaf by leaf, with birds still singing. In winter, the ground rings hard under the spade, and the men take turns because cold and grief are bad company for stamina. The children watch. They always do. They learn the choreography of departure. The linen, the rope, the bell, the words at the porch, the hush at the lich gate as the coffin pauses because it always does. They learn too how quickly living reasserts itself. A hen at the threshold pecking at crumbs between footsteps. A neighbor whispering about seed. Someone reminding someone of a debt that will not be buried just because a heart has. This is not harshness. It is the village's immune system. If everyone stopped fully every time, nothing would ever start again. And still there is laughter. It shows up without invitation and sits at the far end of the board like a cousin who knows he's allowed. There are songs that have outlived 3 reeves and will outlast you. Harvest rounds with verses added for rudeness. Carols that walk into church from the frosty lanes and forget to take their hats off. Lullabies that rhyme butter with better and work anyway. There are little love tricks that make nonsense of statistics. A token carved with a knife point and kept warm in a palm, a posy of hedge, flowers stuffed stupidly into a pitcher, a ribbon scavenged from a bier to tie a bride's sleeve, because one thread of death sewn into a wedding keeps the world honest. There is a joke told at the wrong time that makes grief spit ale and feel briefly lighter. There is a story told at the right time that holds a room still, as if weight has remembered how to distribute itself kindly. If you stay long enough, if you are one of the lucky ones for whom years collect like jars on a shelf, you will become a figure in children's games. The old woman who knows charms for burns and bread, the man who survived a mill accident and can whistle like a blackbird. You will teach by demonstration how to go out of a door slowly and come back through it more slowly still. One day, your own passing bell will sound like a familiar knocking. Someone you taught to sing the second part will be there to answer with the melody. The funerals are thin because bread is thin, paper is dear, and time here is harvested at the same pace as barley. But the people are not thin in the ways that matter. They hold each other up with hands blistered from different chores. They gossip like a defense against silence. They plant trees they will not sit under, and children they will never meet will eat fruit whose flavor neither of you could name. Death keeps the book, yes, but life doodles in the margins with a stubborn, bright ink, laughter, songs, and love in the cracks where the averages cannot see. Chivalry, as we like to picture it, is a silk curtain hung over a draft. We want penance and pageantry, a knight's polished code glinting in candlelight, a lady in a high window, a righteous duel at dawn-clean edges, noble motives, the world made legible by bright heraldry. What we've actually walked through is a room with one bed and many lives, where honor means turning up at the field in sleet because the oats will not plant themselves and duty is not a vow but a habit. The stories we prefer were mostly written by people with soft hands about people with soft beds. The rest of the village kept the ink flowing by brewing, baking, scouring, and dying young. The medieval code did exist on parchment, in the mouths of poets seeking patronage, in the ceremony that made predators feel principled, but it governed a sliver of men and only in public. Knights sang about mercy, then rode chevauchés that burned wheat to the horizon. Courtly love was a performance staged safely away from childbirth and chamber pots. Tournaments were rehearsals for war that maimed farm boys dragging lances for a fee. Even the word chivalry comes from horses. It tells you who counted. The rest, the weavers, dung, gatherers, swineherds, midwives, were the invisible mass on which the glitter stood. If there is a code here, it is the unboastful one. Share the embers, watch the neighbor's child, carry someone's beer when your turn comes, and that other sweet delusion, that things were simpler, as if fewer options were somehow kinder. Simple here means fewer tools against pain, fewer ways to refuse power, fewer doors that open when knocked. It means a diet whose variety is the calendar, not choice. Laws that are memory and mood more than protection. A winter where the cold is not an aesthetic but a subtraction. Simple means your body is an uninsulated house, and everything wants in. The catechism of the day is short. Work, obey, endure. Those who couldn't were not eccentric. They were hungry. Yet there is a second error, the cruel twin of romance. To confuse suffering with stupidity. Medieval people were not a preface to us. They were themselves, clever under pressure. The age was full of the new. Watermills multiplied like thoughts along a stream. The horse collar and heavy plough changed the map of bread. Eyeglasses made old eyes useful again. Blast furnaces and guild statutes, tally sticks and bills of exchange, mechanical clocks that taught towns to hear minutes. A cathedral was not nostalgia. It was an outrageous exercise in engineering faith and stone. Pepper arrived in small miracles. Blue glass turned a street into a rumor. People loved novelty, gossiped about it, saved for it, resented it, copied it exactly as we do. They had law, and lots of it canon, custom, manorial, mercantile entanglements enough to sink a cart. They had paperwork, charters with seals like wax moons, amercements tallied on rolled skins, guild ordinances that could specify how many threads a widow might weave and still be called honest. They had medicine with ideas behind it, wrong in its scaffolding, but earnest in its care. They had art that was not escapism, but instruction, delight, warning. They carved truth into oak where hands would touch it every morning. So why does the silk curtain keep getting rehung? Because myth is therapy. It stitches a fantasy of clarity over the muddle we live in. We miss belonging, so we invent banners and hall feasts where everyone knows the second verse. We tire of bureaucracy and screens, so we dream of the village as a hearth that never runs out of stools. not a system where a missed rent becomes hunger. We want intimacy with necessity, fire we tend, bread we need without the blister, the smoke cough, the dead child. Nostalgia edits like a kindly but dishonest priest. Gratitude, then, ought to be specific rather than smug. The alarm on your phone is not kinder than the church bell because it is clever. It is kinder because the day it begins contains clean water, drains that carry sorrows away quietly, analgesics that take the razors out of pain, antibiotics that argue with death on your behalf, light at the touch of a switch, warmth at the turn of a dial, roofs that do not weep unless your gutters are lazy. A dentist with anesthetic is a small daily civilization. A midwife with a sterile room is a triumph measured in names that live. Central heating is not luxury. It is a political achievement that breaks the old bargain with cold. Consent as law, not custom, that is not modernity's garnish but its heart. We can say thank you without spitting backwards. Those who came before were neither quaint nor pitiable. They were fierce, funny, profane, ingenious, frightened, loving humans operating at the edge conditions of biology and weather. They built a social technology of survival. Neighborliness tough as rope, ritual to portion out fear, jokes to keep shame at bay, rules to make winter behave. They did not choose lice and hunger any more than we choose traffic and notifications. They met the world with the kit they had and improved it when they could. If you want to keep a true relic from this walkthrough, keep their stamina, the habit of mending, the respect for the hour, the one in which work must be done, and the one in which mercy is due. Keep the seriousness with which they approached bread, and the tenderness with which they approached the dead. Keep the sense that a town is a machine made of people, and you are a moving part. Keep the knowledge that comfort is a commons, easily degraded if hoarded. Let the rest go. Leave the romance of righteous violence, the poetry that launders cruelty, the idea that obedience is safety. Leave the nonsense that simpler means purer. Choose instead the prosaic miracles that would have seemed sorcery to anyone in our little hut. Taps, jabs, plasters, painkillers, pains, flushes, rites. The drama now is not whether the roof leaks, but whether everyone gets a roof. Not whether fever will kill the baby, but whether the clinic is funded and the road to it is paved. These are stories worth telling, bells worth ringing. And if you feel the tug of penance, listen for what it is trying to say. You do not miss 1,380. You miss coherence, neighbor names, the visible line between work and rest, a sense that your hands matter to the day. Those we can build in the century we actually occupy. Supper tables that expand like lungs, labor with dignity, festivals that make winter blink, music sung out of time but in tune with company. We can make room for seriousness and silliness both, for grief that is not monetized and joy that does not require a plug-in. Step back out of the hut then, with cold air in your lungs and warm thanks in your mouth. Touch the door lintel as you leave, the way you would a church pillar or a friend. The people you passed shared their pottage and their gossip. The midwife taught you how to breathe. The bell taught you when to begin and when to bow your head. Walk home with indoor plumbing, paracetamol, a clean bed, and let gratitude be the lesson that lasts longer than the itch. Respect their endurance. Refuse the romance. Keep the thread. Sophie arrives in history like a note slipped under a locked door. Quiet, deliberate, full of intention you only understand when you unfold it. She is 14, narrow in the face, quick in the eyes, and already armed with the kind of politeness that lets you cross a room without tripping any wires. Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, minor German house, small purse, large ambition. Her mother, Johanna Elizabeth, keeps a ledger in her head that lists every cousin with a regiment and every prince with bad teeth but good prospects. Her father, Christian August, is more dutiful than dangerous. Power, for now, lives elsewhere. Elsewhere is St. Petersburg, where Empress Elizabeth Peter, the Great's daughter and the empire's great ornament, needs a bride for her heir. The heir is German too, Karl Peter Ulrich of Holstein-Gottorp, recently rebaptized Grand Duke Pyotr Fyodorovich. Frail, excitable, enamored of toy soldiers and Frederick the Great. Elizabeth wants him shaped into a Russian. Failing that, she wants a wife who can outlast him. Names are floated like candles on winter water. Sophie's floats straight. The road to Russia is made of French phrases, Latin primers, and appetite hers. She studies maps as if they are stage directions, absorbs etiquette as if it were grammar, collects languages the way other girls collect ribbons. French, a court's second skin. German, her mother tongue weaponized. And soon Russian, the door she intends to force and then hold open from the other side. She practices Cyrillic until her fingers cramp, rehearses bows until her back learns the language too. She is learning courtcraft before she ever sees a court. How to listen as if you are flattered. How to be agreeable without being furniture. How to keep a thought where no informer can find it. St. Petersburg receives her with frost and choreography. The city is a theatre built by a man who hated curtains. Stone palaces sit like well-dressed conspirators along the Neva. Carriages crunch over snow that remembers every wheel. Empress Elizabeth presides in diamonds as bright as electric light, velvet that could fund a regiment, and a charm that can turn to ice in a heartbeat. Around her, the great regiments, Preobrazhensky, Semenovsky, Izmailovsky, horse guards glitter in parade and whisper in corridors. They are more than soldiers. They are a weather system. When they shift, dynasties do. Sophie studies all of it. The guarded entrances, sentries who watch shoes as closely as faces. The salons, French talk, Russian vodka, German rivalry, all poured into porcelain and never spilled. The informers, a maid with generous eyes who remembers too much, a clerk who copies letters twice, a confessor with a memory like a ledger. Under Empress Elizabeth, surveillance is housekeeping. Intercepted notes are folded back to look untouched. Whispers are washed and ironed into reports. You learn to speak in footnotes and to mean things with a tilt of the head. Before the marriage, there is a liturgy. Conversion is not a romance. It is a public act with a timetable. Sophie crosses herself from left to right for the first time in front of people who will judge her every future movement by this one. At the Alexander Nevsky Lavra, in a ceremony heavy with incense and calculation, she becomes Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine goddaughter to the Empress by ritual, and if she has her way, to Russia by labor. Her mother frets. She is fearless. She has already been ill and walked the corridors with a raging fever to practice her Russian on footmen and chambermaids' stubborn, superstitious proof to herself that will can blister through walls. The wedding, 1745. Gold cloth, sanctified promises, and one pair of eyes that can hold a room. Catherine wears orthodoxy, like a new name she intends to make old. Peter wears a uniform like a boy wears a costume. In public, he kisses her hand and counts the buttons. In private, he drills his wooden grenadiers and tells stories in bad French about a Prussian king he has never actually met. He is not cruel, he is elsewhere. She is not sentimental, she is already at work. Work for a Grand Duchess is seeing without staring. The Winter Palace is a gallery of rules. Who stands where, who arrives last, who is moved forward half a step to be reminded where they truly stand. Catherine learns the routes between rooms that allow you to pass through 3 conversations and leave none of them knowing whether you agree. She takes the temperature of a court, not with a thermometer, but with a hand lightly laid on its sleeve. She becomes devout without being devoured, present at liturgies, generous to monasteries, keen to be seen with icons, keener still to be seen with ideas. There are salons, and there is their mirror image, the Chancery. Chancellor Bestuzhev. Ryumin runs policy and rumors both, and his network has a habit of knowing things before they happen. Letters travel under seals waxed by hands that tremble with fear and hope together. Some of those letters do not arrive. Catherine writes anyway, carefully, elliptically, learning the diplomatic art of sentences that can be read 3 ways and denied once. She cultivates men who can read them. Guards officers with steadier hands than their epaulets suggest. Ladies whose fans flick in Morse. Clerics who think in both Greek and state. Empress Elizabeth loves magnificence and hates boredom. Her court can dance till dawn and decree before breakfast. Her anger is operatic and exact. She forbids Peter to drink at table, then drinks for him. She dotes and threatens in the same paragraph. Everyone works to keep her in good temper, because her bad one can unmake a decade. Catherine understands the anatomy of favour. It has bones, the guards, and arteries, money, and skin ceremony. You keep all 3 unbruised if you can. If you cannot, you make sure the bruise shows on someone else. Meanwhile, the city educates. Frost teaches stamina, the thaw teaches patience. Catherine reads in French and thinks in strategy. Voltaire is a candle she keeps for later. For now, she studies Russians. She listens to the kitchen talk bread prices, dowry quarrels, the weather as theology. She has her own household now. German ladies who know her childhood jokes, Russian ones who know the palace's adult secrets. She keeps them loyal with tact and wages, gossip and prayers. She calls it friendship. She files it under logistics. Peter, for his part, drills in the courtyards, plays soldier with officers who pretend, and insults orthodoxy with the innocence of a man who cannot tell the difference between conviction and costume. He adores Prussia loudly in a court that bleeds for it quietly. He laughs at Russian dress and then at Russians themselves. He is a prince by style and a nephew by fact. The guards salute but do not commit. Catherine watches and learns the geometry of contempt. How far it travels, how quickly it returns to sender. Under the silks and snow, danger accumulates slowly. The secret chancellery has rooms for questions that do not end until you are ready to confess anything. There are exiles in every direction, colder and further than your imagination can travel. Catherine keeps her face calm and her diary guarded. She learns to pray with conviction and to change the subject with grace. She understands that survival here is not passivity but rehearsal. You practice being the person a country might accept. You make yourself plausible long before you make yourself powerful. Occasionally the mask slips and the future looks straight at her. A guards officer lingers in conversation. A general's wife praises her Russian without being prompted. A secretary returns a letter too quickly, proof he never sent it. Patterns appear like frost on a window. The Empress is mortal, the air is unserious, the regiments are bored. Catherine files these recognitions not as wishes, but as facts of weather. When the wind changes, she intends to have her cloak ready. But for now, she is a young woman in a foreign palace where nothing is ever exactly as it seems. She walks the long corridors in felt slippers, counting doorways. She stands in the chapel until the smell of wax becomes a kind of armor. She learns faces, habits, tells the nervous laugh, the careless promise, the man who never drinks unless he is about to say something true. She is not yet empress. She is becoming one, bead by bead, phrase by phrase, small obedience by carefully chosen refusal. Sophie is gone, except as a story she keeps for herself. Catherine remains, colder, warmer, deeper, more legible to the people who matter, and illegible where it counts. In a court that trains everyone to be decorative, she is learning to be structural. When she smiles, it is fluent in 3 languages. When she kneels, it is to an altar. Orthodoxy, empire, self, that she intends to carry with her when the floor begins to move. Outside, the Neva freezes. Inside, the calendar turns. Somewhere far to the west, the man Peter worships draws new lines on a map. In St. Petersburg, The guards polish boots that can march in any direction. Clerks sharpen pens to write the truth that will be required. Catherine reads, waits, writes, and breathes. The viper's nest hisses its lullaby. She does not sleep. Dawn breaks late on the 28th of June 1762, and Catherine is already dressed for history, not for breakfast. The guard's barracks smell of leather, lamp smoke, and decision. She appears in a green riding habit with a cocked hat and a breastful of borrowed courage, and the Ismailovsky men, those human weather vanes who feel change before it's announced, kneel to kiss her hand. Oaths come like drumbeats. A priest lifts an icon. Someone weeps. Someone grins. The city, which always knows before the chancery does, has the news by the time she mounts. The Grand Duchess is no longer waiting. She is ruling. St. Petersburg stages the coup as if it has rehearsed it for years. Catherine rides from barracks to barracks, not hiding behind curtains, but standing in the stirrups, so every pair of eyes can learn a new word: Empress. The Semenovsky and Preobrazhensky answer with steel and shouts. The horse guards supply theatre as well as horse. To the Kazan Cathedral for blessing incense thick as a treaty, then to the Senate for proclamations written while the ink is still impatient, then to the Winter Palace where officials perform loyalty like ballet. The city, trained to keep its face composed, breaks into unprofessional smiles. The streets have gone from neutral to green. Peter, caught at Oranienbaum in a costume that has never been taken seriously, tries flight by water to Kronstadt. Kronstadt, being a fortress as well as a metaphor, refuses him entry. He signs an abdication whose wording will not save him. Days later, he is at Ropsha, very safe until he isn't. An apoplexy is reported. A wrestling match is rumored. The truth keeps its counsel. What matters, in public, is that Russia has avoided a brawl with itself. It has one sovereign, crowned by consent of regiments and liturgy alike, and the churches ring as if they were an army. Legitimacy is labor, not a moment. Catherine works at once. Proclamation. She acts for Russia's happiness. That unanswerable word that sounds like philosophy and audits like grain. Procession. She is seen beside bishops and bayonets. Orthodoxy and the guards yoked like steady oxen. Coronation at Moscow's Dormition Cathedral follows golden crowns heavy enough to pull planets out of orbit, because old Russia must certify new. Coins are struck, portraits dispatched. The calendar learns a fresh saint's day, the date a woman took a country by the hand and did not let it stumble. But you cannot rule on theatre alone. She must speak to Europe as much as to Russia, and she chooses the register shrewdly. Enlightenment French with a Muscovite accent. Voltaire receives a letter that is half fan mail, half position paper. He replies with fireworks. Diderot, with debts as pressing as his principles, finds a patron who buys his library and pays him to curate it for her in absentia. To Paris, she is Minerva in sables. To St. Petersburg, she is a sovereign who reads late and rises early. Inside the walls, she addresses the thing most autocracies dread: law. Russia's statutes are a thicket grown over with practice and privilege. Catherine proposes to prune and then replant. In 1767, she summons a legislative commission. Hundreds of deputies, drawn from townsmen, nobility, Cossacks, state peasants, the estates that will admit they exist. Serfs of private landlords are absent, which is a silence that will echo. To guide them, she writes her nakaz, an instruction that is not a code but a compass. It quotes the fashionable philosophers without kneeling to them, and it states what sounds radical in Russian and reasonable in French. Laws should be clear and few, punishments not cruel for the sake of theatre, torture unworthy of a state that pretends to civilization, the death penalty, a concession to fear rather than justice, judges to judge, not invent. If you tilt the nakaz to the light, you see the balance she is striking. Montesquieu is in the ink, but so is Moscow. She admires separation of powers but does not propose to separate her own. She invokes equality before the law, then adds the invisible footnote that hierarchy still pays the bills. She speaks against serfdom as an offence to reason in the abstract, then omits the paragraph that would abolish it in the concrete. Between ideals and survival, she chooses a sentence that can be read two ways and enforced one. The commission debates with gusto and very little convergence. Deputies arrive with grievances like shopping lists and leave with souvenirs of being heard. Still, the mere act of assembly is a shock to the system. Petitions flow upward rather than sideways. The empire hears itself think. Clerks learn a new tempo. Scribes develop wrists of iron. Catherine presides with a pen, not a gavel, and keeps the minutes where they matter inside policy. War with the Ottomans breaks out in 1768, and the commission adjourns with more experience than law. Skeptics call it a talking shop. She calls it reconnaissance. Meanwhile, she tends to the alliances that keep thrones standing. The church receives respect, and, in 1764, secularization of its lands that makes bishops poorer in acres and richer in salaries paid by the crown. The guards receive gratitude written in promotions and pay. The nobility receive reassurance that the deed signed by Peter, his freeing them from compulsory state service, will not be revoked. Later, she will turn reassurance into charter. In return, she expects what every monarch needs and too few receive. Competent local government, taxes paid without theatrics, and no surprise insurrections in the provinces. Serfdom sits in the middle of the room and pretends to be furniture. She knows it is a structural violence that feeds her treasury and her enemies' arguments at once. She also knows who delivered her the throne, not philosophers, but men with estates. She chooses deferral as much policy as tactic. Reform where she can without waking the house. Rationalize the provinces. Put governors on salaries and under inspection. School the children who are allowed to be taught. Prune the cruelty of the courts so that punishment looks like order rather than appetite. The peasantry notices the margins. The nobility watches the center. Everyone calculates. The correspondence with Voltaire glows. He calls her our northern star and launches paragraphs like bouquets. She laughs and keeps the letters to quote judiciously later. When Diderot finally comes to St. Petersburg, full of talk about remaking the world with a quill, she listens like a sovereign and answers like an accountant. Ideas cost money, but she can afford some of them. She places orders for schools, translators, presses. She builds a theatre because nations are taught as much by scenes as by sermons. The Hermitage begins as a private cabinet and grows into an argument with anyone who says Russia does not belong in Europe. Legitimacy, in the end, is not a medal pinned on your chest. It is a habit you make the country acquire. Catherine turns victory into routine. Audiences keep their schedule, directives keep their verbs. Wars are fought for reasons, not for moods. She is no Republican, and yet she borrows Republican virtues, the talk of public good, the distaste for legal sadism to clothe an autocracy that intends to endure. Her chancery men learn to draft in a new style. Less thunder, more grammar, and always the compromise beats like a second pulse. She will protect the nobles who can break her reign if frightened. She will court the thinkers who can discredit it if offended. She will placate the church without letting it own a country within the country. She will convene a commission to hear the empire breathe, then dismiss it when cannon speak louder. She will write an instruction that condemns torture and then allow its shadow to linger where statesmen say necessity lives. She will look at serfdom and see both a chain and a ledger, and she will not yet choose which to cut. The coup gave her a throne. The years after give her a narrative. Mother of the fatherland, lawgiver without dismantling, enlightened without surrender. Across the Neva, the guards still polish their boots. In Paris, a philosophy reaches for paper. In the provinces, A governor reads a circular and feels watched. Catherine has made her wager that an autocracy spoken in the language of reason can be obeyed longer, argued with less, and survive wars better than the version it replaces. For now, the country believes her. It is a beginning. The empire Catherine inherits is landlocked in its imagination. She means to teach it the sea. The First Ottoman War, sparked in 1768 by a frontier quarrel that would have been a paragraph in another reign, becomes an education. Russian armies stagger at first, then learn their steps. In the south, the Moldavian-Wallachian plains turn into a drill square. On the water, a Baltic squadron sails the long arc to the Aegean and turns the Bay of Esme into a floating lesson-fire ships. Panic, wreckage, a navy made famous by its own combustion. When the treaty comes at Kaymarka in 1774, the language is as important as the land. Russia wins Azov and Kerch, and, more dangerously for Constantinople, a passport. The right to pass ships through the straits and to speak aloud as protector of the Sultan's Orthodox subjects. Ports are the new grammar. The Black Sea stops being a Turkish lake and starts to become a Russian sentence. Crimea, still nominally ruled by its Khans, understands the weather before the almanac does. Potemkin, no mere court ornament but a field mind, reads the peninsular chessboard and begins to rearrange the pieces. Cossacks settle. Greek colonists are invited back to shores older than any single empire. Shipyards are sketched before trees are felled. In 1783, the polite fictions end. Russia accepts Crimea, and the announcement is made in deeds. Sevastopol is inked onto paper and then onto water. Kherson rises earlier, a shipyard first and a city by contagion. Mykolaiv follows. Later, Odessa will take its cosmopolitan breath beside the steppe. It looks like cartography. It is strategy harbours as arguments, fleets as punctuation. Catherine wanted warm water, not because it was a slogan, but because winter had always been a prison. Now her empire learns to winter at anchor and spring out along trade routes of its own making. While the South is being taught to speak maritime, the West is being unlearned as a country. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, noble liberty ossified into paralysis, becomes the stage for Catherine's other lesson, that a state which cannot reform becomes raw material. The first partition in 1772 is presented as surgery to save the patient. Prussia and Austria lend scalpels and smiles. Russia takes swathes of Belarus and Livonia. Borders shift without a shot on some stretches because the real fighting took place in confederations and diet intrigues decades earlier. The second partition in 1793 bites deeper into right-bank Ukraine and Lithuania. The third in 1795 makes maps blush Poland erased like chalk. Catherine speaks of order and protection. Europe hears appetite with manners. Her foreign ministry writes long justifications. But the arithmetic is simple. Territory, population, taxes, buffers. The frontier that once trembled becomes ballast. Threaded through these conquests is a partnership that diplomats envy and courtiers misunderstand. Grigory Potemkin is introduced to Europe as a favorite and misfiled as a scandal. Catherine files him under infrastructure and victory. Their intimacy, spiritual, political, occasionally matrimonial in rumor, if not in law, produces towns faster than gossip can catalogue them. He recruits Germans with ploughs, Greeks with ships, Jews with ledgers, Armenians with caravans. He drafts colonization like opera, choruses, staging, intervals, a thunderous finale as a Black Sea fleet glides out of a harbour that did not exist last season. Enemies who cannot forgive a woman for ruling or a couple for confounding categories invent Potemkin villages, painted fades to fool an empress. The slander sticks to the language but not to the ground. The ports keep loading, the wheat keeps moving, the fleet keeps learning to tack. If there are theatrics on Catherine's famous 1787 progress down the Dnieper, with Joseph II in a humble hat pretending to be a field marshal's cousin, there is also reality: bridges, granaries, newly ploughed fields, batteries that answer when called. Not all wars are chosen. Some arrive like weather. The Second Ottoman War, 1787-1792, is one of those storms. The Sultan wants his seaboard back. Vienna fancies a stake. France, already unstable, still has fingers for other people's pies. The campaigning is brutal and competent. Suvorov replays textbook pages that have not yet been written. On the water, Ushakov teaches maneuver to ships that were trees when Catherine took the crown. The war ends at Jassy. Russia keeps Crimea beyond the reach of retort and pushes its frontier to the Dniester. The Black Sea, which was once a margin, is now an avenue with lights at regular intervals. But if the south and west bring triumphs, the interior brings a sermon written in smoke. In 1773, the Don steppe throws up a man who calls himself the returned Peter III. Yemelyan Pugachev is a Cossack with an actor's nerve and a talent for grievance. He promises abolition of dues, of masters, of the world as peasants know it. Old believers hear millennial weather. Bashkir horsemen hear opportunity. Towns hear hoofbeats, and then silence as their gates open the wrong way. Fortresses fall, noble houses burn. Administrators write their last phrases as soot. For a sick season, the empire feels hollow, and the guards are too far north to help. Catherine, who has written about torture as unworthy, now writes about suppression as duty. She sends professionals with orders and a memory for 1762. Bibikov begins the grind, then death and disease remove him. Suvorov completes the work with the speed that would later become legend. Pugachev is captured in a cage-part theatre for Moscow, part hygiene for the provinces, and beheaded on a winter scaffold in 1775. The corpse is less important than the conclusion. An empire this size cannot be ruled with pamphlets. After the revolt, the tone of the reign drops half an octave. Catherine does not recant the Enlightenment, she edits it. The Charter to the Nobility, 1785, formalizes what practice already gave personal inviolability, corporate rights, a sense that service is honor, not compulsion. The companion charter to the towns manufactures a middle merchants, guilds, municipal councils, out of a society that had preferred two colors. The great provincial reform of 1775 redraws governance, smaller gubernias, governors with names you can write to, courts with tiers instead of caprice, hospitals and schools stapled to the map. Humane penalties replace some horrors. Torture retreats legally, even if not into utter extinction. The death penalty becomes a rare spectacle rather than a routine. But serfdom, the central scandal in French letters, becomes more entrenched in Russian ledgers. Catherine knows the cost of frightening the men who supply her soldiers and collect her taxes. Philosophy occupies her library, order occupies her police. Scandal, meanwhile, becomes a weapon honed abroad. Satirists in London and pamphleteers in Amsterdam find that a woman who commands battalions must be reimagined as a body out of control. Lovers become a ledger of sin for moralists. Favorites become proof of levity for diplomats who lose bids. Catherine answers by promoting competence to rank the Orlovs, who helped midwife the coup, Potemkin, who midwifed a coastline, later the Zubovs, when the century is tired. Those dismissed often leave with titles, money, and intact heads. Her cruelty is administrative, not theatrical. But Europe chooses to believe the bedroom governs the cabinet. It is easier to write smut than to learn logistics. Yet even her critics are forced to read the map. By the 1792, Russia has warm water harbors, a Black Sea fleet, a southern breadbasket tied to export markets, and a western frontier moved to a safer whispering distance from Berlin and Vienna. The church is wealthy in vestments, but not in acres. The guards are wealthy in loyalty. The chancery produces paper at a rate that suggests a modern state rather than a court with annexes. There is still famine, still serf flight, still provincial arbitrariness, still a nobility capable of being sullen if asked to be useful. Catherine knows all this because the reports arrive daily and because she rides often enough to smell the truth behind the varnish. Empire, under her, is made of borders and bedrooms both. Treaties and intimacy, harbours and handshakes, letters to Voltaire, and notes slid to a favourite with tomorrow's instructions. When the Pugachev drums fade, she brightens the stage lighting again. Libraries, manufactories, schools. But the stagehands have new orders. If the whisper of revolt is heard, drop the curtain fast. She is still the northern star to her philosophies. To her governors, she is a margin in red pencil. To her generals, she is a steady hand on the purse and a schedule on which the artillery actually arrives. By the end of this chapter, she has taught Russia to think in coastlines and corridors, to patrol the steppe with settlers as well as sabres, to speak European without asking permission. She has also taught herself the price of keeping so many plates spinning, to charm and to threaten in the same breath, to promise reform while reinforcing pillars, to use scandal by absorbing it, and to close the door on philosophy when the house smells of smoke. The map is her defense. Whatever they say about her lovers, her wars explain her reign. They opened the tiny window in stone, and a century of dust exhaled. Palenque, 1994. Not a pyramid for tourists, but a quiet neighbor to the Temple of the Inscriptions. A lesser, stepped mass scholars file as Temple 13th, sealed in deliberate silence. The archaeologists, Fanny Lipez Gimnez chief among them, lowered lamps and themselves into the cool, measured dark. On the floor waited a limestone sarcophagus, its lid unmoved since the 7th century. The crack of air was a whisper, the first pry, a slow syllable, then all at once a colour without sound. Red. Powdered cinnabar rose in little storms that made their own weather and clung to everything lid, walls, bone the way blood clings to a memory. Inside lay a woman arranged with a care that rejected accident. Skull-cushioned, perhaps once on jaguar hide. A mosaic mask of jade tracing the planes of her face. Necklaces that still caught the lamp like dew. Earspools, shells, a scatter of bone pins and obsidian blades that meant more than they cut. She had no glyph to name her, and so specialists gave her a title that admitted both ignorance and awe. The Red Queen. She lay a few steps, and a civilization's theology away from Kayinich Janab, Pakal, the Great, whose own tomb had appeared like a carved myth next door 2 decades earlier. The pairing felt intentional. In a culture where stone was decision and corners were cosmology, proximity was argument. Only 2 burials at Palenque were drowned in cinnabar like this. The message was not grammar but colour. Life, sacrifice, rebirth, the red of maize, blood and sunrise, danger handled like sacrament. The jade, cool as river light, was the other half of the sentence breath, greenness, endurance. If Pakal's famous lid shows a king falling into and sprouting from the world tree, a mapped theology in a single slab, the Red Queen's chamber speaks in fewer words, but not in lesser meaning. Her east-west axis follows the sun. Her offerings are a kit for passage through Xibalba, the underworld. Her mask is not disguise but a dress, a face the gods will recognize. Who was she? The science said not Pakal's mother, no maternal link in the surviving DNA, but it did not close the door on marriage. The historian's hunch reaches for Tsakbu Ajao, a noble bride who bore Pakal heirs and stood beside him in ceremony. Others argue priestess, ancestress, a matriarch whose name melted, even as her ritual remained hard as stone. Across the Maya lowlands, the pattern repeats. Women as power-bearers, sometimes crowned, often veiled by later forgetting. Sak Kayuke, Pakal's mother, ruled as regent and did not mumble while doing it. At Yaxchilin and Naranjo, queens raise lintels and alliances with their own hands. The Red Queen's anonymity is not absence, but a decision. Her identity is written in placement and pigments, in a tomb that is more working instrument than memorial architecture designed to change a person into a presence. There is a second red this story owes us, and it is half a world and a millennium away. The cut flesh of watermelons in a Mexico City studio, a still life signed with a dare. Viva la vida. Long live life. The hand that wrote it belonged to a woman who had spent decades being x-rayed by fate. Frida Kahlo, born in 1907 Coyoacan's Casa Azul, the bright house that was both cradle and final room. Childhood gave her polio at 6, and a limp she masked with skirts. Adolescence gave her appetite, mischief, books. Then, in 1925, the city gave her iron. A streetcar caved in the bus she was riding. A handrail speared her hip and exited her pelvis. Bones failed, skin tore, organs whispered about stopping. Somebody shook a bag of gold powder in the crash, and the dust glued itself to her blood like an obscene blessing. Strangers thought they saw a saint. In hospital they cast her like a statue, and the long stillness began. Her father brought brushes. Her mother engineered a bed, easel, and a canopy mirror so she could regard the only model guaranteed to turn up. "I paint myself because I am so often alone," she would later say. And because that face split, masked, unmasked, could carry symbols that men's faces in salons never had to. Mexico taught her an aesthetic she could wear and paint at once. Tijuana dresses as politics. Folk retablos as a grammar for telling disaster and survival on small metal panels. Hummingbirds and thorns and monkeys as metaphors that bit back. Diego Rivera entered as both comet and weather system, a muralist already his own nation, 20 years her senior, thrilled by the unembarrassed ferocity in her small works. They married in 1929, a dove to an elephant if you liked an easy insult, a coalition if you watched the output. He taught her scale by contradiction. She taught him that intimacy could be epic. America, when it came, was both gallery and trial. In Detroit, she bled out a pregnancy and painted the grief in Henry Ford Hospital, herself on a sheeted island tugged by threads to symbols that would embarrass any polite salon. The two Fridas split her across a bench, the European lace heart cut and clamped, the Tijuana heart full, and offered while self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, made martyrdom modern and indigenous at the same time. The broken column took her spine and replaced it with a cracked ionic shaft, meaning that needed no textbook. Through politics, the Trotsky Asylum in the Blue House, the marches, the membership card with its particular red, and through betrayals that would have made a smaller person cautious, she insisted on abundance. Love refused to make her smaller. Pain refused to make her clean. When Mexico finally staged a solo exhibition for her in 1953, her spine petitioned against it. So she arrived horizontal, queen of a carriage that was simply a bed. They poured tequila, and she laughed through the morphine. Within a year, she was dead 47, the official cause a pulmonary embolism, the unofficial cause a life lived at a temperature that cracks glaze. Days earlier, she had shouted from a wheelchair at a protest against a coup in Guatemala. Her last diary line is both a goodbye and a spell. Espero alegre la salida, espero no volver. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. What ties a jade mask in a limestone box to watermelon flesh under a last signature is not just red, it is the refusal to be reduced to injury. The woman in Palenque was bathed in cinnabar not to hide decay but to mark transformation. She was not being erased. She was being made for traffic between worlds, her identity carried in color and stone when ink did not volunteer a name. Frida, who had every excuse to turn herself into a tragedy and elected instead to be a theater, painted her pain so precisely that it became everybody's anatomy. Then she painted fruit and wrote life on it, in case we missed the joke. Both bodies were broken. Both wills refused to be. One crossed a cosmology by ritual, the other by art. Both left a corridor, others can still walk in, from flesh to symbol and back again. Look again at the colours. Cinnabar's sacramental red, toxic and holy, that turns a tomb into a sunrise. The red in Frida's ribboned heart, in the arterial threads between two versions of herself, in the pulp stamped Viva la Vida, as if the paint itself could feed you. Jade's green over the Red Queen's face breath, maize. The wet of jungle has its echo in Frida's Mexico, the parrots and leaves behind her shoulders, the outfits that made nationhood a body plan. Both stories are, finally, about the politics of endurance. A queen, nameless in text but placed in power. A painter called every name. A woman is called, and wearing them like medals, each insisting that meaning is not what happens to you, but what you do with the after. The archaeologists closed the chamber and left a hole in our certainty. Visitors queue now for the Casa Azul and leave with notebooks less empty. The red, in both places, refuses to dry.